If you were tuning in and missed our last show with interesting and confounding guest Jeff Nyquist, absolutely I recommend that you pause this, go back, and listen to our previous episode, The Russian Ruse, as explained by Jeff Nyquist. In that show, I don't think the language got too heated. I feel like we were all basically pretty civil. However, some insults were leveled, perhaps to our discredit. And one of those, Mr. Nyquist wanted to return to the show to respond to, which we absolutely felt was fair. That involved me referring to him as historically illiterate for propagating an idea that I have heard in other places, but I find very, very weird, which is that in the age of exploration, in the time of Chris Columbus, there was basically anybody.
Just before the age of exploration, because remember, Columbus hadn't sailed yet.
Sure, so just before the age of exploration, and thank you for that clarification, there was basically anyone, let alone anybody learned, anyone educated, or anyone in power, who thought that the world was flat. I've seen this meme everywhere from Frank Sinatra songs to Bugs Bunny cartoons. It's really weird to me, and I always just sort of chalked it up to some kind of like cartoon kids idea, just some kind of weird bit of folklore. And I was, to be honest, Mr. Nyquist, pretty surprised to hear you repeat it. But I would like to hear, maybe I'm the crazy one and you know better than me. So I'd love to hear your response.
Well, when you say somebody is, look, I don't claim to be a historical expert. That's a pretty tall. You could say that there is some parts of modern history that I'm an expert in. Very small, narrow. An expert is a very small, narrow. General history, though, when you say someone's illiterate, it means they haven't read anything. And when you cited what I said about Columbus and Salamanca, that nobody at Salamanca would have said that the world was flat to Columbus, and you said that was clearly historically illiterate. Well, it's about 30 years since I read The History of Columbus by Washington Irving, one of the seminal American historians. Now, people can criticize, I understand now at Salamanca, they can't find the documents that Irving would have used to reconstruct that conference. But it doesn't matter. I don't know what history of Columbus you've read, but I actually read a biography of Columbus written by a historian. Maybe it's out of date, but that doesn't make me historically illiterate. I have read. I've tried to read in every period of history. I'm weaker in some areas than others, but that's a pretty big thing to say about somebody. And look, I think I sent you the link to the Washington Irving history, where he talked about how at Salamanca, which is a great Spanish university, you got to remember that the universities in Europe in the Middle Ages were founded by the Catholic Church. And of course, there has been since ancient times people who've known that the world is a globe. This was understood in ancient times. There was a guy in Egypt who measured the distance between the Earth and the Moon and the Earth and the Sun. He figured a geometrical measurement, and he wasn't exact, but he was in the ballpark, right? So people have known the Earth is a globe for a long time. But in the period starting with the Dark Ages, when a lot of literacy that had existed in the Roman Empire, and we only have a fraction of the books that were written in antiquity have survived. And in that period, and we're talking about the period of the Inquisition now in Spain, a lot of the universities were with the clergy, and a significant percentage of the clergy got their ideas about the world and the universe and the planets and everything from understandings of the Bible that were cultivated in the medieval period and in the Dark Ages. So they believed that when St. Paul said that the heavens are like a tent, that meant that the world was flat because the floor of a tent is flat. And they would quote things from the Psalms and whatever indicating that the world was flat. So they would take certain Bible passages literally. And there was also Lactantius, which according to Washington Irving, they quoted Lactantius at him. Now, not everybody at Salamanca, and I wasn't clear enough when I said that, but they thought that the world actually a mistake in calculating the ocean. They didn't know the Americas were there. So even those people that knew that the world was a globe thought the ocean was too big to cross. They would die of thirst or they'd burn up in the torrid zone crossing it. And I mentioned that in passing, that they'd burn up in the torrid zone. That was one of the criticisms. But the other criticism was to quote Lactantius. And Lactantius mocked the idea of the antipods, right? The antipodes, I should say, rather. The antipodes are the opposite end of the earth, right? Where people's feet are pointed towards us as our feet are pointed towards them. And Lactantius very famously mocked this idea. And according to Washington Irving, this was Lactantius and St. Paul and others were quoted to Columbus there. So I'm just saying, I'm not historically illiterate if I'm quoting a historian. And the generation I grew up in, by the way, Washington Irving wrote a famous multi-volume biography of Washington, one of the first ones. He was sort of a seminal historian. And when I was in grade school, the kind of histories that were in Washington Irving were the kind that were common in grammar school. So we were all taught that Columbus was told you're going to fall off the edge of the world if you try to sail, which is, of course, part of the truth. The whole truth was that people were at Salamanca who also knew the other. But there wasn't a unity of opinion on these things because half of the learned people in those days were just learned in the Bible and theology and scriptures, and they drew their scientific view. The world was created in 7 days, and there was even biblical scholars that, you probably heard the earth was created in 4004 BC. That goes back to this kind of period. So, and we know now these aren't scientific. The world is not only 6,000 and something years old. So I just wanted to point out that I'm not historically illiterate. I actually had Irving's history in mind when I made that statement, and I was using it mainly as a metaphor for people who have new information becoming mocked. And by the way, science you can find in every period of history. Even science has been wrong, and the people who are trying to make new discoveries are mocked.
So when I say historically illiterate, here's what I mean. Here's what the term means to me. What I use it to mean is not specifically that you have or have not read anything at all about history. Historical literacy is the ability to apply context to what you read about history. And that ability, in my opinion, would preclude anybody from believing a history of Columbus, for example, which alleged that in the time of Columbus, anybody at the University of Salamanca, for example, or any educated person, or even the average uneducated person, would have conceived of the world as flat. Certainly in the West. Now, I understand that there are Eastern traditions that held the Earth to be flat. I know that, in the courts of the Chinese emperors or whatever, they thought that the Earth was flat. But I'm talking about in the West. The idea is just belied by any other piece of historical context you want to measure it against. And you referenced some of it yourself. You said, well, look, there had been prior to Columbus's voyage people who set about trying to measure the distance between the Earth and the sun, the Earth and the moon. 300 years before the birth of Christ, we pretty accurately measured the circumference of the Earth based on our knowledge that the Earth was round. There were, before Columbus ever sailed, globes. So what is a globe? A globe is a map of the Earth printed onto a ball, right? Why would they be making globes if they didn't think that the world was round? Now, the Lactantius quote that's in Irving's book, that's an accurate quote, but it's a quote from a guy who lived in the 4th century, not in the 15th century. And even in his day, that was sort of a comical assertion that the Earth was flat. Even in his day, it would have been held against him by most people that he thought that the Earth was flat.
By most people in the 4th century believed the world was a globe?
Absolutely. Yeah, sure.
How do you know that?
Well, because you can read other writings from contemporaries, both before, during, and after the time of Lactantius that talk about.
Do you think everybody was educated in the 4th century? What do you think the literacy was?
Well, okay, when I say most people, I mean most people
and
who
by
are
the
able
way,
to.
Lactantius was not, obviously they had controversies. We have flat earthers now. Can you imagine in the 4th century how many people, if people today think the earth was flat, when we have satellites and all kinds of proof that it's not, you really think it's that incredible that people thought the world was flat?
Well, I do. I think what you're doing here is succumbing to what C.S. Lewis called chronological snobbery, which is it's like a trap, I guess, that we all are susceptible to falling into, where we assume that sort of basic knowledge, that the base knowledge of the average person today is significantly greater than the base knowledge of the average person 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. And I just don't view that as being true. I think that the
So,
average
what
man today.
history of Columbus have you read that said that nobody ever said that to him?
Well, I actually have never read a history of Columbus, but
Now, that would be historical illiteracy, never having read a history of Columbus, criticizing someone who's quoting a history of Columbus that they're illiterate.
well, I don't want to make this into a semantic discussion, but clearly you and I are using
Well,
the term. Sorry, go ahead, James. Did you
Literacy
want to say
means
something?
reading. It means
Yeah,
so
well,
I'm gonna
well, wait a second, wait a second.
I'm
No,
gonna jump.
before let me respond to that real quick because I didn't say that I
Go
have
ahead.
never read history. I've I read voraciously. That's how I was able to spot immediately, knee jerk, point blank. I was able to spot
ah.
that it was obviously a bogus assertion. It was obviously a bogus
So that
assertion.
Washington Irving made it up.
Correct. Let me read to you from Wikipedia what Wikipedia says about Irving's biography of Columbus, and I will read verbatim. In 1828, Washington Irving's highly romanticized biography, A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus, was published and mistaken by many for a scholarly work. In Book 2, Chapter 4 of his biography, Irving gave a largely fictional account of the meetings of a commission established by the Spanish sovereigns to examine Columbus's proposals. One of his more fanciful embellishments was a highly unlikely tale that the more ignorant and bigoted members on the commission had raised scriptural objections to Columbus's assertion that the earth was spherical. The issue in the 1490s was not the shape of the Earth, but its size and the position of the east coast of Asia, as Irving in fact points out. Historical estimates from Ptolemy onward place the coast of Asia about 180 degrees east of the Canary Islands. Columbus adopted an earlier and rejected distance of 225 degrees, added 28 degrees based on Marco Polo's travels, and then placed Japan another 30 degrees further east. Starting from Cape St. Vincent in Portugal, Columbus made Eurasia stretch 283 degrees to the east, leaving the Atlantic as only 77 degrees wide. Since he planned to leave from the Canaries 9 degrees further west, his trip to Japan would only have to cover 68 degrees of longitude. So that would have been the issue. Anybody at Salamanca or in any university of the 15th century or among any learned or educated class in the 15th century who asserted that the earth wasn't round would have been laughed at, just as people are laughed at today for asserting it. I'm going to go further and say that the idea of a flat earth, although it has historical precedent going all the way back, is at an all-time peak in popularity today. In other words, I do not believe that there has ever been a time in history where more people entertained the idea of the Earth being something other than a three-dimensional object than there is right now. It's a very, very modern meme. I think it came.
You know that very many people in the Middle Ages, their education was in religion, not in science as we understand it. Of course, scientifically educated people knew the earth was a sphere in most times. But you remember the Catholic Church was not, which was dominant in the institutions, I'll say this again, was not made up of strictly scientifically educated people. And the mistake you're making is that in making decisions about things, they did not call all the shots. And I'll remind you that the people burnt at the stake for in the following century, saying that the earth did not revolve around the sun, that the universe basically revolved around the earth, which was supported by the church. So that there were serious misunderstandings about the way the universe worked that had to do with the dominant position of the church over more scientific thinkers. Yeah, of course, scientific people who were scientifically educated have known that the world was a sphere. But were those the people that dominated the institutions of learning? Those institutions were Catholic at the time. And by the way, the claim that this is fanciful, Washington Irving went to Spain, and we don't know what documents he collected. And so this is a moment, I mean, you may be perfectly right. Washington Irving's assertion may be fanciful. It may have been invented. It may be romantic, but he may have had documents that don't exist anymore. They don't have any documents at all about the conference. So you don't know whether he had a document or not. He could have made it up. He might have had something. He lived in Spain. He wrote a history of Muhammad. Irving wrote histories about the Spaniards. He was there. He was very interested in that period at the time. I don't know. I'm not an expert in that period, but I did quote from Irving's history. And I think that for you to say that people in the Dark Ages and Middle Ages didn't believe the world was flat, I think you got to go back and look at the kind of ignorance that existed. Yes, in antiquity, there was a higher levels of literacy during the Roman Empire, but when the Roman Empire fell, literacy fell, and people went there was a very primitive consciousness in terms of scientific understanding that reigned for hundreds of years during the Dark and Middle Ages.
Well, I want to respond to that because I actually think that you've touched on something. It occurred to me in doing a little bit of preliminary research for this show that the meme of a flat Earth, or the idea of belief in a flat Earth, which I would say is a myth, is in many ways an anti-Catholic canard. However, I want to let James jump in here because I cut him off before. So I'll circle back to that, but I want to hear what James has to say.
Well, I was going to mention two things to kind of put the semantic debate to bed. And Ted, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but when I vaguely remember Ted making the historically illiterate comment in our previous show. And when Ted said that, and in my visceral instinct to this is maybe it's a generational thing, I interpreted that when Ted said it as not that you literally haven't read anything about history, Mr. Nyquist. I think he just meant it as a lack of generalized information about something. I think this is an age-related thing because I would have made the same comment as Ted. I've made comments to my own friends like, "Oh, you're politically illiterate." Not that I mean you've never read anything political. It's just like you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. And I'm not asserting that you have no idea what you're talking about. You very clearly are a very learned man. But that is what I think Ted meant. I don't think Ted was literally calling you an illiterate.
Well, sure, he said I was historically illiterate about Barbarossa too. Because I asserted in 1943, Heinrich Muller was going around recruiting spies for Stalin in the German government. By the way, Barbarossa happened about 2 years before that episode cited. So please explain to me, why am I historically illiterate about Barbarossa? And what books have you read about Barbarossa? What do you know about it?
Well, I could cite Ghosts of the Ostfront by Dan Carlin, for example, as sort of like a foundational basis of my knowledge of the Eastern Front in the Second World War. I have read other things on it. I don't want this to turn into a sort of like bibliographic pissing match. I do want to qualify the statement that I made.
It's a pretty big statement to say that I'm illiterate. That's saying that I don't know about that particular subject. And now if Washington Irving is wrong, I'm not an expert in that period. But Barbarossa, there's something I really do know about.
Well, I can believe it. And, if we go back to the show, I think that I said something along the lines of, I said something to the effect that you have some very interesting generalized or specialized knowledge, right? And I think I mentioned the story about Schellenberg as something really fascinating that you had. That
you reduced it to a piece of trivia. So why am I illiterate about? Because I don't know anything about Barbarossa. What is that about? Well, what am I illiterate about that?
I think the idea that the Third Reich was hopelessly compromised by Soviet spying to the point where it was basically a proxy for the Soviet Union is historically illiterate. Yes, I do. I will stand by that. You said that
You're
Bormann
putting words
was.
in my mouth. I didn't say that the Third Reich was a proxy of the Soviet Union. I said that the head of SS counterintelligence, Heinrich Müller, tried to recruit the head of SS foreign intelligence, Walter Schellenberg, and that the
Yeah, I
Reich
can.
government was being penetrated and infiltrated by Soviet agents in the latter part of the war because many people felt that the war was lost and they wanted to not hang at the end of the war. That is, now you're saying that I'm saying the Third Reich is a proxy. Obviously, the Third Reich is fighting the Soviet Union. Uh, this is not what I'm saying. So tell me now about Barbarossa. Please be specific.
Well, okay, so you said that Bormann was. I'm going from memory here, but I remember you saying that you thought that Bormann was a spy. And
There's a book that's been written about that called Hitler's Traitor. There's been this has been alleged by former CIA counterintelligence officer Pete Bagley's book. This was what he asserted in his book, and in fact he was working with the former KGB officer, talking about a meeting that in fact took place outside of Vienna. I think it was 1955 between Mueller and this KGB officer that Bormann and others were recruited by this spy ring inside the Third Reich. There's been a number of people who've made these claims. Reinhard Gehlen, the former head of the Bund, the German intelligence service, in his memoirs, he claimed that Martin Bormann, as well as Mueller, were Soviet agents. There's a lot of people who've made these assertions that are in intelligence work, who've spent their lives in intelligence work. So it's not some fantastic claim.
I wasn't going to say that it was a
Right.
fantastic claim at
So
all. I
back
wasn't going to
back to
say that it
back
was
to
a fantastic.
Barbarossa. Now, why am I historically illiterate, and how does this relate to Barbarossa?
You demonstrate repeatedly sort of amazing encyclopedic knowledge of, let's call them small picture events. That's what I want to call them. So before you differ with that, and I know that you would, that's what I want to call them. Details, let's say, about the pivotal events of the 20th century, and you just demonstrated that. I think what you're failing to do is take a big picture view. This is why you've subscribed to this theory of the Soviet Union's dormancy within the Russian Federation, of the Russian Federation as a sort of mask for a sleeping Soviet Union. This is why you're still trying to fight a war that we won 30 years ago, because you are not contextualizing the events of our lifetimes, particularly specifically of your lifetime, because I was a very, very young child when the Soviet Union fell, with the rest of history, to see how normal an event like this actually is. The collapse of a big empire, for example, actually is. And I cited as evidence for that two things. One, the flat earth assertion, which, whether or not you believe that, really should have nothing to do with whether or not you've read a specific biography of Columbus by a specific author, but should reflect a more generalized knowledge of history. And I'm going to maintain here that anybody with a generalized knowledge of European history would understand how incredible a claim that is. And then also, and perhaps I totally misinterpreted you, but it seemed to me that you were saying.
So you're claiming you have a really good general knowledge of history and you can judge these things better than me.
Well, I don't want to make this into a you versus me thing.
No,
Let's
I'm just, this
orient
is
all of
what you're
ourselves.
basically saying is that I don't know and you do.
Well, what I'm saying is that
And
this
you're
isn't.
better educated in the general history of Europe than I am, right? That's what you're saying.
What I'm saying is that this is an imperfection that you have. Now, I'm sure that
Wait a minute. When did Barbarossa happen?
uh,
Date that it occurred.
either late 41 or early 42. I can just look it up.
You
Let
mean
me look
you
it up.
don't know what year it happened?
I
What do you
know
mean?
I'm
Come
going
on.
from memory. I'm going from memory, but I believe late June 41.
That's right, 22 June 41. But Ted here doesn't know that. Ted, let me ask you.
But
7 years war. 7 years war. What century did it happen in?
I don't even know who the belligerents were.
You don't. Do you know what that war was called in the United States, that it had a different name?
No.
You don't know the 7 Years' War?
Well, if it had a different name in the U.S., then I probably do know it.
French and Indian War.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about
What
that's
century did
great.
it
So you
happen
asked
in?
me. So you asked me a
What
trick
century
question.
did? No, it's not a trick question.
It's
You're
yes, it
if
is
you
a
have a knowledge of general history, you should know when the 7 Years' War
yes, but I
happened.
know but I know it by a different name. The French and Indian War happened
Okay,
in
what century did it happen in?
it happened in the mid 18th century. What, like the 17, I would guess the 1750s?
Yeah, when did it end? Do you know?
7 years after it started,
Oh, okay.
obviously.
Pardon.
Okay.
All right.
I
You
mean,
don't know. Okay,
Jeff,
well
you're
let me
proving
let
my,
me
but
ask
Jeff,
you
you're
let me
proving
ask
my
you
point. You're
let
proving my
me
point
let
here.
me ask you let me ask you a question.
Okay.
When you have such loose familiarity with things, when you don't really know them very well in detail, and we all have different kinds of details, let me ask you, who was the great British historical writer of the 19th century, the one that was the most famous and the most admired and considered to be the greatest stylist in prose in English in the 19th century? Do you know who that was?
No, go ahead and tell me.
Thomas Macaulay. Okay. You don't even know the major historian of the 20th century in English who wrote What Do You Write? You don't even know what he wrote. You don't even know his name. Look, your familiarity with history, I would submit, oh, okay, maybe you got me on Columbus and Salamanca. Maybe Irving made it up. Washington Irving made it up. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he had a document. We know that the clergy in the universities might have quoted Lactantius to him. It's possible, but maybe not. Maybe you're right. But that doesn't make me historically illiterate. But I believe that you are. You are saying I was historically literate about Barbarossa and you couldn't say what year it happened in? I'm sorry, but I deserve an apology from you. You're not as
Well,
knowledgeable about history as I am, and you have no right to call me historically illiterate.
well,
No
here's
right.
what I think is okay, sure. So here's what I think is happening. First of all, I would reduce your argument to I know you
I
are, but
happen to know actual historical facts that you don't know. Oh, that makes me historically literate, but you have the context of it.
I
Like
feel
I,
like I feel like you should be better than this. Now, I've heard you out, and here's my response. First of all, your argument is I know you are, but what am I? It's just a childish. If somebody calls you on a defect, right? To say, oh, okay, I see that you have a defect is just whataboutism. It doesn't actually,
no,
there's
no,
nothing
you,
self-critical about what you're doing right now.
you have made a claim
Uh-huh.
that I am historically illiterate. That's
Uh-huh.
what you said about me. When I
Yes,
wasn't
and
even there to defend myself, when I was a guest on your show, aren't you embarrassed a little bit that you said I was historically illiterate about Barbarossa and you didn't even know what year the event happened in? Aren't you a little embarrassed?
well, the whole war only lasted like 5 years. You know,
No, not even that.
it was a
Not,
very
the
short
war
period of
between
time.
Russia and Germany. Yeah.
Well,
Do you know the date that World War II started on?
well, some people
Do you
think it
even know the
started.
date the war started on?
Well,
Oh no,
do
you
you want
don't
to
even.
let me answer the question, Jeff?
Okay, sure.
You know, there are historians who say that it started in 35, right, with the Japanese invasion of China. Some people say it started with Hitler's invasion of Poland, others put it back to the Sudetenland.
When did Hitler
So,
invade
for,
Poland?
in 1939, I don't know the month.
Hmm. You're not
You're
really familiar
again,
with
again,
you're not really knowledgeable about World War II.
again, Jeff, what you're doing here is you're proving my point. So, first of all, I want to break your argument down into two categories. And I'd love if you would give me the room to do so because I feel like what you're doing here is I think you kind of know where I'm going with this, and I think you're trying to preempt it because I think you understand how discrediting it is.
Oh,
I want to say
oh, that's funny.
I want to clarify here that I don't dislike you. I don't think you're a bad guy. I certainly don't think you're acting maliciously. I think
No,
you're very
you think I'm mentally ill.
I do not, and I never said
Oh,
that.
you did. Play the tape back. You said that I clearly admitted to being schizophrenic.
I never said I
I'm sorry,
never
not
said that
schizophrenic.
at
No, you
all.
said I was paranoid.
Well,
Obviously, I'm a paranoid. That's
I
what you
don't
said.
use the term. I don't mean to use the term paranoid in a
Well,
clinical
you did.
sense.
Oh,
I,
well,
okay,
I know, Dr. Freud, you didn't, you're not an actual psychiatrist, so, or psychologist, so you can't really diagnose me.
I
But
get. Well, I was not. I wasn't attempting to. I
you
wasn't
did make
attempting
that
to.
assertion about me, by the way.
See, here's the pattern we're falling into here, Jeff. We're browsing like a bee from one flower
Well,
to
Ted, I
another.
just want to make you eat your words. And I'm
Yes, I can
having a
see
good
that.
time. I'm
I
having
can
a good
understand
time.
that. But, well, all right. I mean, I think people are going to listen to this and they're going to draw their own conclusions, Jeff.
Yes, they will.
All right. Well, you sound pretty smug about that, but I think you'd be surprised by. I think a little bit of honest self-examination would leave you somewhat surprised, and I definitely think it would cause your smugness to evaporate.
You want me to admit that I'm a paranoid person and I'm mentally ill and I'm historically illiterate and that I haven't spent a lot of my time reading books on history? Is that what you
Well,
want me to admit? Because I am not an expert in history and I can make mistakes like anybody else. I've never claimed to be perfect. But
okay.
I think I need to defend myself when someone says he's clearly, because I'm defending a thesis here about
Mm,
the danger to my country, and you're mocking that thesis and you're making personal attacks on me to ward it off so you don't have to confront the truth about what's going on with Russia and China right now. And I think that's very important. So I'm not just doing this about myself. I'm doing it because in this regard, you attacked me personally. I'm going to defend myself because what's at stake is I want you to understand Russia is a dangerous enemy of the West, and so is China, and they're working together. And you want to call it paranoid? You want to say I'm historically illiterate, that I don't get the context of history? Well, let's talk about the actual facts. But you don't seem to know them very well. So I
okay.
don't think you're in a position to judge whether I am saying the truth or not.
Well, I want to divide this into different categories here because I feel like there's a lot of room for confusion if we keep jumping back and forth. So I'm going to go point by point. Point one is the question of whether or not whether or not Ted is historically illiterate, all right? Which is another, so this is a sort of a new matter that you've brought up. Point two, it would be the question of whether or not Jeff is historically illiterate. And then point three is this point about paranoia, right? So I want to answer them in order. I am going to concede right here that I'm just going to say I am historically illiterate and just take that argument off the table so you and I can just agree on that. Ted is historically illiterate. And here's why I'm going to do that because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to my central argument. If my argument is that you have some historical illiteracy, which is precluding you from seeing the foolishness of I think foolishness is the wrong word because I actually don't think of you as a foolish person, but let's say the error, the misprioritization of your concern over Russia, right? Well, I could also be a complete historical illiterate, but that could still be true. If a doctor smokes 6 packs a day, but then tells me, hey, smoking cigarettes is really bad for your health, and I notice that you're a nicotine addict, it's not going to make him wrong if he's also a nicotine addict. Now, maybe you could go toe to toe with me or better on the minutiae of specific events that you are well read about. But I would like to point out that this has been very one-sided so far. So in other words, you have quizzed me on a few things. The exact date in which Operation Barbarossa was launched, I didn't know that. You quizzed me on whether or not I knew that there was another name for the French and Indian Wars, that it was also called the 7 Years' War. I didn't know that. And then I think there was one other thing, and I forget what. Oh, a guy named Macaulay, who was a writer in the 19th century, who I was unfamiliar with. And 3 out of 3, right? I struck out because you knew all that stuff and I didn't. But we're not turning the tables here, right? I didn't turn around and say like, okay, well, Jeff, let me do a little impromptu quiz, and you answer, these questions for me. And I don't, and the reason is because I don't want to do that. I think that that's somewhat childish, and I don't think it really proves anything. I also think that in doing this, you sort of validated my thesis, which is that you are not somebody who is wholly ignorant. And in fact, you have a vast amount of knowledge, but that your knowledge is sort of particulated or granulated. You know a lot about like Yuri Brezhnev or like some of these different dissidents. You can quote, these ex-intelligence officials and key figures in the Cold War and the Second World War. You knew about Schellenberg. You knew this story about Bormann transmitting coded messages to Moscow. And it's very interesting stuff. But that, I think that
It
goes.
doesn't matter.
Well, no, but I think that it goes hand in hand with my thesis, which is that you are not taking a very big picture view of history because you're caught up in sort of a sequence of interesting, but I would say ultimately trivial stories. And that's basically, I think if people play back the tape, if they listen to the last episode, that was basically my message. Not verbatim, but I'm paraphrasing. And I gave you props for this story about Schellenberg and that it was interesting and that you know a lot of interesting stuff. But I think that this small picture view of history is what is making it difficult for you to put the collapse of the Soviet Union in a broader historical context in which it makes perfect sense that a country that was our enemy 40 years ago could be one of our best allies today, which indeed I would view Russia as one of the best allies that the United States has today.
Really?
Yes, really. That was the whole topic of our last show, was our differences over that.
And what makes you think that they're our ally, our best
Well,
ally?
I don't want to get too distracted on that, but why don't we put that at the back of the queue? So I want to circle back to
Okay.
that. But there's one other thing I want to talk about before we get to that, which is the word paranoia. If I use the word paranoid, and I can believe that, right? I can believe that that's a word that I would use. I did not in any way mean to make a clinical diagnosis of you. In no way was it my intention to say that you had a mental illness. I don't believe that you have a mental illness.
Paranoia is a mental illness, you know.
Correct. The
Right.
word paranoia has a clinical definition.
Right.
However, and I think you would be feigning ignorance if you pretended not to know this, the word paranoia also has a popular usage. I could describe myself as being paranoid. I could say, well, I've been reading a lot about Corona, and I know it's pretty safe for me to go to the grocery store, but I'm getting paranoid. It would be very normal. And nobody who heard me talking that way would think, oh, that's interesting. He's admitting that he has a debilitating mental condition. Because there's a pop usage for this word. Now, maybe paranoia originates from the field of psychiatric research, and it has been appropriated in popular culture to have a broader usage, kind of like if you call someone a type A or a type B personality, or you say that somebody is bipolar, right? If you describe somebody as being bipolar, you're insulting them for sure, but you're not actually making a clinical evaluation of them. You're just saying this person is very moody, right? It has a pop usage. The pop usage is what I intended. What my meaning was, and I hope that you'll see my meaning for what it is that your fears of Russia are not unfounded, but that they are inordinate.
They're paranoid.
Well, I don't want to define my term by repeating the term. So I'm trying to define the term paranoid here. And what I mean by that is that your fear of Russia is inordinate, that it is not ordinate to the threat that Russia presents. Now, in my opinion, this is because I think that your experiences with the Marxists at your university, at UCal, which I think you said it was UCal Irvine, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that experience was probably pretty formative. And I think that that's a really fascinating story. I actually think that that's the most interesting story that you have to tell. And I would love to hear more about it. But in my opinion, that formative experience, and probably others, right? Because I know that this set you on a path of really being interested in and researching the Marxist subversion of the United States by the Soviet Union, which is a real phenomenon that and I acknowledged in the last show that that's a phenomenon that happened. I'm aware of the Frankfurt School. I'm aware of the Fabian strategy. I'm aware of the KGB's sort of special tactics approach to subverting the culture of their enemy societies, right? I know that that's real, but I think that this led you to an inability to accept that your enemies had lost. And so now we find ourselves in a situation where
Why would I not accept it, since it's much easier for me to accept it than it is to deny it?
well, clearly
Why
it
wouldn't it
isn't.
just be an intellectual, if I'm wrong, why wouldn't it just be an intellectual error? Why would it have to be due to some psychological problem, some emotional inability to accept?
Because I would say
Don't
that
you think that that if I'm wrong, it's because I've mistakenly believed facts that aren't true. I've accepted sources that aren't right. Isn't that the real explanation if I am wrong?
no, because I think sometimes an incorrect belief exists in such great contention with with the overwhelming and obvious and manifest body of evidence. Sometimes that contention is so great that it goes beyond a mere intellectual error and becomes sort of a it
It
becomes
needs to be psychologically explained.
well, I think that sometimes clinging to an incorrect belief that is very, very manifestly untrue becomes
So, I've
pathological.
been writing for 33 years and I've been waiting for my intellectual better to put me in my place to tell me where I've gone wrong. And all I get is an ad hominem attack that I've got a psychological problem and that's why I made the mistake. Nobody's willing to actually go and study the facts, know the actual information, know the defector literature, follow the history of the Russian Federation since the collapse of the Soviet Union to see that the evidence is there, or talk to people from those countries who know what's going on. I
Well,
can't
Jeff,
get you to go there. I'm not sure whether the emotional resistance is really mine or yours.
well, actually, I feel like it was us who couldn't get you to go there because on the previous show, we put a question to you, I guess about halfway through, that we didn't get an answer for until very close to the end. And the question was very simple. It was, what does the about face look like? What does the heel turn look like when the Russians stop pretending to be our friends and start being open about being our enemies? How is that going to manifest? And the answer you finally gave was that Russia was going to annex not just Alaska, but Alaska and all of Canada, all of North
No,
America, basically.
parts of Canada.
Okay, parts of Canada,
But
and that the
I'll give you a simpler question.
wait a sec, no, no, no,
Russian
no, no,
troops in
no, no,
Venezuela. Russian troops in Venezuela.
no, Jeff, no. I'm trying hard not to interrupt you, and I just want the same respect. You also said that the lower 48 states were going to be wholly annexed by China. Now, this is so absurd. This proposition is so crazy that it
Why is it absurd? Why is it
well,
absurd? Look, a Russian defector, Colonel Stanislav Lunev, told me and at least two other people, and probably the U.S. government, that the Russians and Chinese have made this as their agreed upon division of spoils in North America if they win the next World War. Are you saying this is not true?
I think that that could very likely be the
So
case.
you're saying I made it up.
No,
So now
I
you're saying something different. I'm not
I
just
never said that you
emotionally.
made it up, Jeff.
Well,
You
no.
keep
I'm
saying this.
asking you, are you saying I made this up? Or
No, I'm not.
okay,
I'm
so
not
then
saying that.
Lunev did tell me this, right? The highest ranking military defector from the Russian Federation didn't defect from the Soviet Union, he defected from the Russian Federation. Okay?
Jeff, I have not the least reason to doubt your sincerity. I think you're being entirely sincere. I think that everything you say you've been told, you've been told. Everything you say you've
So
read.
why is it absurd?
It's absurd because it would be a monumentally disastrous and ruinous undertaking for either country. It would be an undertaking with inordinate cost and zero reward. Russia could not even annex Afghanistan, but they're going to annex North America above the Canadian border. The lower 48 is a huge landmass filled with people who are very heavily armed. There are probably more guns just west of the Mississippi than there are in all of the Chinese military. But they're going to take it over? And to what end? What would the purpose be? Why would they want to do this? These are sort of just the basic questions.
Did you check out the secret speech of Chi Hao Chen, which explains all of this? The
Well,
former defense minister of China delivered a speech to high-level party cadres about the whole reasoning behind taking the lower 48 states and making that the center
Well,
objective of their strategy.
Well, I'll take this one because if you remember, Jeff, on the last recording, I mentioned that according to my own research, the speech had originated with a website called Baksoon, who is associated with the Falun Gong. So is Epoch Times.
No, Epoch Times, they published it in, I think it was February of 2005. That's where I first saw it. Yes, and I work for Epoch Times, so I know the senior editor and I have talked about it, and it's on the Epoch Times archive now if people want to read it. But I made a copy of it and I put it on my website so that people could read it. Have you read that speech?
I don't think I read the whole speech. I had to look it up so I could find the name of the general because I was very interested in the origin of the speech.
Right.
And again, according to my own research, all of the research I did said it originated with Baksoon and was then picked up by the Epoch Times. And the founder of Baksoon, who's associated with some of the same groups that the Epoch Times are, namely the Falun Gong, claimed that the source had no secondary verification and he could not verify whistleblower credentials. So I'm curious if the Epoch Times was able to do that, because I have a very hard time believing that the full-length text of a speech calling for the invasion of the United States was somehow escaped from China in the mid-aughts after being given in the early aughts, and the U.S. government, NATO, or no other significant Zionist neoliberal organization issued some kind of rebuke of it.
I see. So they're supposed to say something about it for it to be true.
Okay, so this is an interesting little.
Now, Colonel Lunev wanted to write about this subject in his book, and the CIA made him take it out. That's all I know from Lunev's side. Now, why would they do that? I don't know. See, because I don't know why the CIA does things. I do know that the CIA. There are issues with the CIA being penetrated by the KGB and by the communists and our intelligence services generally. You've got Aldrich Ames and you've got Robert Hansen. You've got a lot of problems now we see with there's Diana West wrote a very interesting book called The Red Thread, talking about the communist background of James Comey and John Brennan. John Brennan voted for Gus Hull in 1976. James Comey, in an interview, admitted to being a communist in college. So there's some very strange things about our establishment now. I mean, half the people I went to graduate school were Marxists, and these people, they got credentials. They have good jobs now. So where do they end up? I mean, we have a problem in our country with communism. Not that the majority of people in general are communists, but among educated people, it's a kind of sort of disease. It's really a mental contagion. And
so I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying here. You're saying that the Chinese plan to take over the lower 48 states, to annex them by military force, is being covered up by the deep state because the deep state are compromised Marxists?
I don't know. It could be that the United States has a counter strategy and they don't want the communists to know that they know. I don't know. There's a lot of denial, just like you guys deny. Look, everybody in the intelligence field, there's a lot of, just like everywhere else, just like in the issue of believing the world is flat, people have a variety of opinions. And this is what I call Nyquist law. Nyquist law is that everybody believes something that someone else thinks is crazy. Okay, I learned this years ago when I worked for an editor who believed that we didn't really land on the moon, which really stunned me. I'm working for this guy and he's telling me that we couldn't have landed on the moon. Now, my dad had the USIA contract for doing all the filming of the astronauts on the ground during the Apollo missions from Apollo 11 on. And so I remember as a kid, some kid at school said, "Yeah, we didn't really land on the moon." And my dad came back from Houston on one of the moon shots. And I said, Dad, this kid at school said we didn't really land on the moon. And my dad just laughed. He said, well, if we didn't, then I'm the guy that faked the pictures. So I found this amazing to me that people believe we didn't really land on the moon. So that's just one example. Everybody believes something that someone else thinks is crazy. And here again, what you guys are talking about, you think what I'm saying is crazy. People, intelligent, educated people in the intelligence community think a very large variety of different things. They have different interpretations of the facts. This shouldn't be too hard to understand.
Okay, but you said that we're deniers. It's not that we look, when somebody proposes something and you say, okay, I would like to see some evidence or some proof for this, it doesn't make you a denier in the sense that somebody who thinks that the moon landings never happened is a denier. It just makes you a questioner. I
Well,
think that
the
it's
thing is
well, wait a
that,
second.
yeah,
I think it's a very open question as to whether or not this Chinese plan to invade the lower 48 states is a real thing.
yeah.
And citing a single speech whose provenance is very murky as the sort of coup de grace evidence that this is real,
Oh, no,
to
I don't
me,
cite that as the coup de grace evidence. It's the fact that there is a part in that speech that's exactly what Colonel Stanislav Lunev told me was the plan. That, to me, is what makes that speech real.
I'm asking a question purely for my own comprehension here. Just so I understand, you were given the exact information Mr. Lunev was told to you before the speech
Yes.
was.
Yeah.
Okay,
He
I
told
just
this
want
to
to make
me
sure
in
that
February
I'm.
of 99. I was at a conference in Washington where he and I spoke together, and he mentioned this to me, and I sort of kept it to myself. And when this speech came out, I thought it was a hoax when I first read it. But then someone told me I should read it again, and I read it again, and I had missed it. You know, your mind kind of wanders as you're reading something uh, that kind of thing. And I saw it all of a sudden. We made a deal with the Russians to trade land in the north for what we wanted. And this is what Lunev had told me they had done, that this agreement existed between Russia and China. And there it was in the speech. And I had never seen any confirmation anywhere in all of my looking through literature and everything of what Lunev had told me. No other source had said the same thing. So it was just in the back of my head. Now I have two data points, and they both agree with each other. That's why I believe it's true. And then when you go and you look at the force development, you look at the Vostok 18 exercise, where the Russians massed ships in the Bering Strait. Look at it, Vostok 18. In 2018, they had a military exercise, a joint military exercise with China and I believe Mongolia, and they moved all these ships toward the Bering Strait. What was it? What kind of exercise you move ships towards Alaska, and you're Russia, and the Chinese are part of it? That's a very interesting event, don't you think, in this context? And that the 071 amphibious transport that the Chinese have, it's not meant to invade Taiwan. It has a several thousand-mile range. How far is San Diego away from the Chinese coast? 6,000 plus some odd miles. So what's with that, right? So I am doing analysis here. I'm trying to figure this out.
let me float a hypothesis by you and just get your opinion on it. Suppose that this agreement of how to partition the North American landmass in the event of a world war between Russia and China, suppose that it was a real agreement, but that it was just conditional. It was just conditional on such a war ever occurring, and that it wasn't made with the intention of actually starting such a war. It was just sort of drawn up in secret for this is our contingency plan for if, for some reason, unthinkably, and God forbid, such a war should ever happen. Does that seem like a plausible scenario to you?
That they were just talking and it was never going to happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly plausible, except we have a virus. That same speech talked about destroying the United States with a biological weapon. Now we have a biological, possibly weapon. We have a biological agent, COVID-19, in this country, killing people. And it came from where? It came from China. How did it get here? They incubated it in Wuhan, cut off the trains to the other Chinese cities, let the international flights go out. Did they let it go out on purpose? Yeah, a lot of people are saying they did. Even the president is suggesting they did it on purpose. So you know what? I'm just starting to tick up all these different things. And I'm saying, look, guys, something's going on here and we need to wake up to it.
We are at our hour cutoff where we have to bring in our other guest. I do want to make a sort of closing comment. And the comment is this. We obviously have very, very stark differences in how we view the world. I really liked your Nyquist's law about everybody thinking something that someone else thinks is crazy, or even that generally people think is crazy. I think that that's a pretty astute view of human nature. I think that that's probably true down the line. To me, the thing that you think that seems crazy is that the Soviet Union is still sort of dormant and waiting to reactivate. But just because your views seem outlandish to me should not be a reason for me to insult you, because probably I have views that other people think are outlandish, or even that most people, that the vast majority of people would think are outlandish, and I wouldn't like to be insulted either. I use the term historically illiterate, I think, very glibly and without really thinking through how insulting that would be. And so I would like to apologize to you here and now for doing so. It was very gracious of you to come on our show. It was very gracious of you to share your story, the story of your life, the story of your ideas in what you knew was basically a somewhat hostile environment because, obviously we have a difference of opinion. The difference of opinion is the thing that made you interesting. So that's, not a bad thing. It's why you were there in the first place, because you have this very different, very interesting way of looking at things. So in a way, it's a little unfair to attack you or insult you over being so different. If you weren't so different, we wouldn't have been interested in the first place. So I would like to apologize for that. I think that the sentiment that I was trying to express could have and should have been better articulated. So I don't want to take anything away from my point about the round Earth versus flat Earth thing. I still think it's a valid point, but I am sorry that I expressed it in that way, and I hope you'll accept my apology.
I do thank you very much, Ted. I think you're basically a fair person.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Now we have another guest. Oh, sorry, James, go ahead.
Was going to say, I don't have a whole lot to say in closing other than we should definitely have Mr. Nyquist back on, because I really started getting interested when we brought up coronavirus and the Chinese 071 amphibious transport dock, which I have a great interest in. General naval power is a means of power of projection. So I think we should definitely have a geopolitics episode, because I got my blood racing. So
Yeah, well, sure. I would love to open invitation, Jeff. Anytime you want to come back on, you're absolutely welcome.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. I know you have another guest, so I better shove off then.
Okay,
I guess it's mid-afternoon, so have a great afternoon.
Okay, you guys too. Good luck.
yeah, have yourself a great day. Bye, Jeff.
All
Thank you
righty.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Okay, Farrelei, can you hear me? Okay,
Hello,
there
yeah,
we go.
how are you?
Hey, okay, Farrelei, I don't know if you were listening to that conversation or not.
Yeah, I listened to the conversation since I joined the call.
Okay, do you have any thoughts about that before we move on?
Oh no, I don't have any comment. I didn't know what you were discussing.
So, you were somebody who reached out to me with, I guess it started with you sharing a series of images about things that should not be, sort of expressions that should be taken out of general usage. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's correct.
Do you want to give a little introduction of yourself, who you are, and then segue from that into what these, I guess they were kind of meme images, what these meme images represent, or what you think is significant about them?
Okay. Yeah, I can go ahead and do that. So, to start off, the meme images that I had sent you were based on a campaign group at Duke University, and it's basically just a collaboration between faculty and students at the school to think before you talk, and just seeks to raise awareness about language marginalizing that marginalizes minorities and offensive to particular identities. So I tend to spam several people with those images, and basically about me, I'm I'm 23, queer. I live in Chico, California, and I don't have much to say beyond that.
First of all, I guess I should say, what would you like to go by? Do we say Farrelei? Is that the name you want to go by?
Yeah, we can go by Farrelei. That works for me.
You said that there's the series of images, which, by the way, we'll be showing those images on the show. And if there's any you want to send to me that you'd like to be included in the video, please Skype them over to me. All right?
All right, sure. I've already sent like a slew of them, so I think I'm good.
Oh, did you? Okay, perfect. So do you think that we on the show that we're guilty of using this marginalizing language? Is that a problem that you see with us?
Yeah, I've heard it through previous streams on the Politics of Three YouTube channel, so I thought it was relevant.
Can you give examples of sort of where we're going wrong and how we could better express the same sentiment?
Hmm. I mean, I don't watch the channel very closely, so I don't recall any specific thing that I heard that indicated to me that you aren't on the same page as people like me are. So I basically just kind of came on the stream expecting to present why I want to challenge some of the misconceptions and myths about transgenderism. Like a lot of common ones include whether transitioning is effective and arguments about youth transition and, obviously dehumanization of trans people in bathroom bills. Those are all things that I think kind of are debated very frequently. So I was just going to go with that. I didn't have anything else in mind.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
All right. So my message to you was concerning like a comment that you had made about why you shouldn't laugh at cross-dressers, as you would put it, or not laugh. I think it was be disgusted by them. Like a trans person has a gender that doesn't match like what the gender or sex they were assigned at birth, and so it's not really like a man who likes to dress up as the opposite sex. It's that they are the sex that they identify with, or gender.
If a person is the sex that they identify with, then in what way are they trans? I thought that being trans meant identifying with the sex that you aren't. What does trans even mean then?
So trans just means to have a gender identity that's different from the gender that you were assigned.
Assigned by God?
No, just that
Who's
people
doing
kind of took a look at you when you were born and made a guess, and sometimes they got it right, but in the case of trans people, they got it wrong.
So I have a friend who just had calves. He owns a farm up in Dalarna in Sweden, just had calves. I can very clearly, and this is a very base argument, but it demonstrates what I find to be lunacy of the position so well. I can very clearly look at most mammalian species in the world and see if they are male or female, and humans are no exception to this. Just because we're capable of forming societies and we have the ability as a species to think in a very abstract manner doesn't somehow negate a biological reality.
Okay, that's a pretty ridiculous argument, I would say. Like, the reality is that, well, almost everyone has both testosterone and estrogen in their bodies. Everyone's cells are capable of responding to a deficit or surplus of those hormones. And like estrogen activity, like obviously activates estrogen receptors, and that leads to the expression of certain genes that ultimately, produce secondary sex characteristics that are associated with women, like breast growth and soft skin, reduced body hair, and fat storage, things like that. And like, since almost everyone has these genes, regardless of gender and regardless of their sex chromosomes, then this is like why hormone therapy is so effective for trans people, and it kind of brings a point home of like why it's like the claim that you'll never have chromosomes, or you won't be like biologically the gender that you identify with, is like ludicrous, because it's not realizing that the presence or absence makes no practical difference when it comes to transitioning. Like, this is like the changes aren't like superficial, cosmetic, or artificial. They're really the same as the biological pathways of development in cis people. Because like if a trans woman has hormonally grown breasts, then they don't understand that all breast development is due to hormones in trans and cis women alike. So it's like there's no difference.
Okay, so Farrelei, when you say secondary sex characteristics, why do you use the word secondary, and what do you mean by it?
Secondary, I just mean that like coming after the other sex hormone, the male sex hormone.
Can you
Like,
explain that? I didn't understand that at all.
yeah, it just like, I don't know, like I guess I'm just thinking of features that appear during puberty and its sexual maturity in animals. So,
Okay, so is there such a thing as a primary sex characteristic that's different from a secondary sex characteristic? And if so, what would that be?
I don't know. Like, I just think that it's like I just think that secondary sex characteristics include like what I'd mentioned earlier, that it's things that develop during puberty for different sexes.
Sure, but generally we can tell what a person's sex is before they go through puberty. In fact, we know before they're even born what their sex is. So what I'm going to assert to you is that there's such a thing as a primary sex characteristic. And I'm not trying to take anything away from your assertion that, for example, breast growth is a secondary sex characteristic. It's true that a female human doesn't develop breasts, right, until she goes through puberty. But that isn't a process which turns her into a female. That's why it's called secondary. Primarily, she's a female because, first of all, she's recognized as a female because of the primary sex characteristic of her genitalia, and she's created as a female because of the primary sex characteristic of her chromosomes. Would you agree with that, or do you think that that's a bigoted scientific
Yeah,
perspective?
yeah, I think it's transphobic. Like, it's a fact that a vagina is a vagina and XX chromosomes are XX chromosomes, but calling those things female is a choice of terminology. And there's no like scientific paper with a conclusion along the lines of like, we have strong evidence that people with vaginas are female. There are no aspects of biology that depend on labeling those features as female. Like, if you referred to vaginas and XX chromosomes as female, then wouldn't that like actually require revising or overturning like any physical facts or scientific findings? It wouldn't. Like, it would mean that denying that a trans woman's penis is a penis and a trans woman's vagina is a vagina, it wouldn't.
Your assertion is that the labeling of male and female is purely a function of nothing more than human labeling, that it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, and it just kind of picks out one feature and lends itself to labeling the body as male or
Right.
female.
So I'm curious then why, and of course it would vary by linguistic group, every human civilization that I am aware of, even the ones that don't have what I'm sure you would call in a satirical fashion gender roles, have words for male and female. Now, sure, some of them have words for people who have the misfortune of being born in some way deformed or androgynous or with more than one sex organ, but again, that's a separate word. Every human civilization, no matter how disparately they have evolved, has naturally come to this conclusion of male and female. That would preclude the need to have some sort of broad scientific consensus when it's simply innate to human nature.
Okay, well,
It would be like everyone labeling a leaf, and then someone telling me, no, that's not a leaf. You only think that's a leaf because you call it a leaf, even though every other human civilization that's ever developed, aside from one that's stuck in the middle of a desert, knows what a leaf is.
well, I think that you're just kind of picking one feature, like as I was saying earlier, and that like you don't have a leg to stand on, because if you group like them like um if you're choosing to call like a trans woman male because you've chosen only to look at like their penis, then that's kind of circular, because it then what about people who had like a a surgically constructed penis, and so they've gone
Not a
through
penis. That's a
transitioning.
surgical construct. In the general way that the male penis evolved, you can't recreate that. Not in a meaningful way.
Well, okay, but I'm saying that you're defining physical sex by the genitals, and so then I feel like a trans woman who has a genital reconstruction would then have both like a gender and a physical sex that should be considered female.
Well, wait a second, Farrelei, you're misstating our perspective here. We aren't defining physical sex by genitals. We're determining physical sex by genitals. We're defining physical sex by chromosomes.
Yeah, but I'm saying that like I don't know, it's a broad concept that encompasses many differentiated features of the body. I can't get too into it, but
Well, wait a second. You can't get too into it. Like you asked to come on the show so that you could get into it. Don't be a shrinking violet now. We've got you on the show. This is your chance. You're in the spotlight here. Get into it. Explain where we're wrong here.
I'm just saying that I wanted to just like go ahead and present my argument. I mean, I have like a lot of data that can back it up, but I'm just saying that I don't define physical sex. Like, I don't think that people should be like. It's not as if you don't evidently sex people based on their features when they take their pants off. It's um, like I said, I don't know. Um,
Okay.
I can't answer that.
So you said before that actually here, let me just ask this. I'm not a drag cross-dressing transgender person. I'm not in that whole world. Uh, so I want you to help me. I've heard the term passing. Can you tell me what passing is? What is passing? What does that mean?
Okay, so I don't know. I don't like view passing as it's not a term that I particularly use, because I just don't think that, because I think that it's kind of implying that the person is should blend in as if they were cis people, and it's kind of like how it's kind of like forcing trans people to become secretive about every part of their lives, and it can keep them from advocating on their own behalf, and it can like isolate them from other trans people if they're worried about appearing, because passing just means like appearing in a way that makes people not know that you're trans and think that your gender, that you didn't have to transition because your gender was in line with what you were assigned.
Okay, what if gender assignation is basically meaningless, then how would anybody have any sort of general guideline for judging whether or not what someone's gender was by their appearance?
Well, you shouldn't judge what someone's gender is by their appearance. They have to decide that for themselves, and it's also based on a lot of like if someone has transitioned, that's because they've gone through a lot of work with a doctor who was able to determine that they had that medical condition that they were born with. And it's like passing for gender Like, it's about appearances. But I mean,
Isn't at the end of the day, though, isn't the core of the issue, at least to the trans person, that it is about appearances, that it is about feeling and appearing to be the sex that, I'm going to say they are not, that they were not born as. Again, like I mentioned earlier, this view that you have of the constructed nature of male and female, whether it be what you would define as separately being gender and sex, isn't something that for the vast majority of human history and innate to human nature holds up. This is a, for lack of a better term, middle class, limousine, liberal view that you're able to establish because, and please, correct me if I have something wrong about your life story. Well, I can't really be wrong about this. You live in the United States of America, one of the richest countries in the history of the world, and have the luxury of doing this. If I dropped a trans person who wasn't, quote unquote, passing into the middle of any current primitive culture or any of our cultures going back, go 20 years back and then put it into effect from there, people would look at it and be like, dude, if it's what you would call a trans woman, would look at this guy and say, dude, what are you doing? This is something that is innate to human nature, that you have the luxury of sitting around and intellectualizing into a construct. Every human ever has come up with the same two genders, male and female, based on sex. This is innate to our species, and the only way that you can get around it is by having the luxury to sit there and construct an ideology.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that I think there's something really ugly about taking the niche case, which is, of course, hermaphrodism, which is a terrible tragedy, right? If somebody is born as a hermaphrodite, that's a very, very sad tragedy for them. It
Which is why
prevents
we
them.
invented a whole word for it.
Sure, and that condition prevents them from engaging in a lot of the like sort of normal cultural things that everybody looks forward to from a young age, like getting married, having children. I think there's something extremely sinister about sort of exporting that as a lifestyle, exporting a serious and very tragic medical condition as a lifestyle to people who are otherwise healthy. I think that's really insidious. And you don't seem, I mean, you seem like an approachable person. I mean, you're easy to talk to. It's just hard for me to, it's hard for me to like internalize or wrap my mind around the idea that you would want to push that kind of degeneracy as a lifestyle on people who could otherwise be normal and have healthy, happy lives.
well, I mean, I don't agree with your choice of word being lifestyle, because I don't think that transitioning is a choice. It's like a medical condition for the birth condition of transsexualism, gender identity, body mismatch. And it's like, if it were just like something that people kind of do as their own choice, then there wouldn't be so much science behind gender identity and transgenderism being a legitimate birth condition. Like, people who have transitioned, they don't usually regret their decision, and so it seems like
What?
They have
Wait a
a
second, what?
20 times higher suicide rate than the general population.
yeah, and that's because they live in a cis heteronormative society.
That is absolutely categorically incorrect. My own country did a 30-year study. This is one of the most accepting places for transgender people in the world. I see them on a daily basis. Most of them do not pass, by the way. My country did a 30-year study of this. During that 30 years, transgender people have only become more and more progressively accepted in my society, to the point where they allow children as young as 10 to go through gender transitions. And they still, through that entire time, averaged a 19.1 to 20 point higher average suicide rate than the general population. That is not a result of people how society treats them, because it would make sense. It's intuitive that as society became more accepting of transgenderism, the rate at which they commit suicide would start to go down. But instead, it's held steady, despite the fact that you can barely find anyone in my country who would dare say a negative thing to them or about them, and would bend over backwards to show deference to them.
Yeah, and those aren't the facts that I've gathered from what I've learned about this matter, because like I've read that
It's a study done by the Swedish government. You can pull it up on their
well,
website if you
the United
want.
Kingdom's National Health Service did a study recently that found that better than 99% of people are happy that they transitioned, including surgery.
Okay,
And
then why do they commit suicide at such a high rate?
Well, actually, before you answer that, could you just could you Skype that study over to me so I can link it in the video? Because I'm sure our viewers would love to read more about that.
and I was also going to talk about youth transitioning.
Sure, yeah, that's fine.
I sent you a link to a study, I believe, is where I got that statistic from.
I do think that James's point about the suicide rate, though, does need addressing. It's pretty commonly understood that suicide rates among people who have had sex change operations are much higher in the US, at least, that's the context in which I know it, than they are among people who have not. Do you dispute that?
No, I believe that all LGBT people or people who identify as who don't fit traditional labels, they tend to have a higher suicide rate. It's a fact. I mean, I had read something that like about 41% of trans people at least attempt suicide once. So, but I also have read that the risk of suicide is dramatically decreased if the trans person receives support from their family and community, which is back to why I feel passionate about youth transitioning being accepted.
Aren't you kind of goalpost shifting, though? Because before, what you said, when James said that people regret it, you said that they don't. And now what you're saying is that they do, but they just regret it for us. You know, you're just disputing the reason why they regret it.
Well, what I'm saying is that the suicide rate seems high for trans people, but I don't think that the difference is that big between the cis population and the trans person who has completed their transition. Because
The 20 times rate is the rate for people who have transitioned. The study that was done by my government in conjunction with several universities is considered, and I'd be very interested if someone could dispute this, is considered the longest, most comprehensive study of the life evolvement of transgender people. I mean, it took place over 30 years and cost millions of dollars, and they came out with a pretty shocking statistic of 20 times higher than the general population.
and the studies that I've said suggest that the rate starts to decrease when transgender people receive medical treatment, and that it's at its lowest after transition is completed. So there's not a big disparity in post-op trans.
This is post-op trans people who are having a 20 times higher suicide rate.
Okay, well, I mean, completing the transition, maybe, I don't know, like, there's social transitioning and hormone replacement therapy and everything, including surgeries. Like, it's very complicated. I don't know if the people who were referenced.
Post-surgery.
Okay. Well, I don't know then.
And I can add another study on top of that if we're going to keep studying studies from Birmingham University, where they followed around 20 post-surgery patients 100 post-surgery patients, and 83 of those post-surgery patients felt uncomfortable within their quote unquote new bodies within 15 days. And 2 years into the follow-up study, most psychiatrists were characterizing them as traumatized.
So sorry, James, can you repeat what the total number was and then what the number was who felt regret?
They followed 100 post-surgery patients, and it was 83.
Okay. I also have kind of a problem, Farrelei, with the study that you linked because it doesn't give any like n figure, right? So it doesn't give any information about what the population body is. It says, and I'm just quoting here from what you linked me, the number of people who experience regret with transgender related surgery is actually really low, according to recent research in the Netherlands, between 0.3 and 0.6%. That's it. That's all it gives in terms of numbers. There's no link to the study methodology. There's no information about what the base number of people is. Now, it does say later on, it says research done at the gender clinic in the Netherlands showed that between 1972 and 2015, a total of 14 people experienced regret. So we could extrapolate from that if 14 people experienced regret and it was 5% of the total number of people that they followed, then what does that mean? They followed 280 people? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that such people anyway are statistically irrelevant because many of them were probably never trans to begin with. From what I've read on statistics, like we're talking about maybe a couple dozen people, whereas there are millions of trans people who are living happy, fulfilled lives. And I don't know why instead of celebrating 99.5% of people, you'd want to focus on the exceptions.
Well, okay. Sorry, James, but just real quick, we disagree with your premise, right? So it isn't that we want to focus on 0.5% of people, it's that we don't believe that this is 0.5% of people. Again, my problem here is that there's no numbers. The only number that here are the numbers that they give us in the link that you sent. The numbers are 0.3, 0.6, and 14. And it's between 0.3 and 0.6% for people from the Netherlands who regret transitioning, and that number of people was 14. But we don't know how the study was carried out. We don't know, how these people were surveyed. We literally can't even check their math. So I just don't agree with your premise that all these people, like these guys who are getting their dicks chopped off, are really happy afterwards. It definitely defies credulity. So I feel like the onus is on you to back it up, not on us to explain why we would be grossed out by that.
Like, I don't have a statistic. I don't have a lot of sources for statistics, but the thing is that being trans, it's recognized by a lot of people in psychiatry. Like the American Psychiatric Association wouldn't regard transgenderism as a mental disorder, so it can't be that their suicide rate is due to them not having medical treatment.
That's actually another premise I firmly disagree with. The American Psychiatric Association receives funding and donations from special interest groups who have a legitimate interest in getting things to be no longer classified as mental disorders. It's not the American Psychiatric Association is not some grand objective accumulation of the best and brightest minds of psychiatry and psychology in the United States. It's a special interest group that people contribute money and opinions to ad hoc and whenever they feel like it.
Yeah, and it's not even just that, though, because, like, you would also have to say that you know better than the World Health Organization or the American Medical Association.
I entirely hold that view. I do. On this particular issue, I do really believe I think I know better than these people when it comes to mutilating bodies and children.
I want to kind of like square off against you on this, Farrelei. Isn't what you're doing just credentialism? Like, aren't you just making an appeal to authority here anyway? I mean, that's not a very solid basis for making an argument, especially if what you're arguing is so outlandish. I feel like you need to do a little bit more than just say, well, somebody smarter than you agrees with me, so you should agree with me too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the people who, like, as I was mentioning earlier, the American Medical Association, all those people, they they don't ignore facts and invent their own out of thin air to support their homophobia or ignorant bigotry like a lot of conservatives do. And I think that if you really did do a lot of research into the statistics behind trans people who regret their decision or youth transitioning, you'd find that there's an overwhelming amount of evidence that trans people are exactly who they say they are.
I have, if we're going to continue with studies, I have 2 studies here from 2008 and 2013 that tell me by the age of 20, and these numbers are respective to the study, 61 and 63% of people detransition.
Well, I would question whether those people were actually trans.
Isn't that just a no true Scotsman fallacy? Now you can just say, okay, well, if somebody's really trans, then they wouldn't be dissatisfied with their decision to mutilate their genitals. And it's sort of just like a proof of being trans that you can go through this process and then not be depressed on the other end. This is like witch trial logic.
Well, this goes back to why I defend youth transitioning, because I think that, you know, the protocols for the use of puberty blockers in gender questioning youth recognize the potential concerns about them regretting their decision. And I mean, puberty blockers, they provide a lengthy period of time for the consideration of their gender identity and developmental course. And they're long-acting injections that prevent the development of changes that accompany puberty that they would probably not want to have if they were trans. And so the treatment, it's more safe than you realize because it doesn't have permanent effects. It's been described as completely reversible in medical literature, and it just kind of delays puberty for a number of years so that medical professionals can like consider whether to make the transition more permanent with treatments like hormone therapy or surgery if that's appropriate in that circumstance. So I think if medical professionals are able to, you know, come to the decision that the child or teenager doesn't need to discontinue puberty blockers, then they probably are actually trans, and so then they statistically have a greater than 90% chance of living a happy and fulfilled life in their post-op identity.
I have 2 responses to that. Number one is, according to, again, we can go data back and forth, but regardless, the most comprehensive study, they have a 20 times higher suicide rate. And secondly, I am aware that the hormone treatments are reversible. However, that doesn't somehow justify the severe mental trauma that these people, this child, is going to be subjected to by people and professionals who are espousing to care for them. I'm always amazed that people who promote childhood transition don't seem to recognize that it's a far healthier reaction to get these people psychiatric treatment. I mean, when someone feels the desire to cut off one of their limbs, we treat that as a mental condition and we throw them in a psychiatric ward until they stop trying to chop their arm off. But you're trying to justify a world where when a child says, oh, well, you know, mama, I like to wear dresses and makeup and I feel like a girl. And this parent, who, if you can call them a parent, happens to think, oh, well, it's totally justifiable to take my child to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a doctor who's going to, rather than try to treat this blatantly obvious contradiction of nature logically, instead they're going to say, oh, well, you know, you're probably a girl. We better make sure you grow breasts, wear dresses, and eventually I can construct you a gross facsimile of a vagina, which, by the way, the people who do those surgeries are all part of special interest groups who make tons and tons and tons of money from doing it. One I can think of readily is Dr. Rumor, who's one of the leading transition surgeons And, her patients have something like a 78% complication rate. And I think the average complication rate's in the upper 70s. No sane doctor would do those surgeries on people with that high a complication rate. Well, hell, you don't even need the complication rate. No sane doctor would remove and deconstruct a perfectly healthy part of a body in order to create a facsimile that isn't natural to this person. That's why most doctors, the vast majority of doctors, refuse to do transgender surgeries.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't agree with their prevalence because, like, I mean, it's repairing a problem. It's not fully
You're
healthy and
destroying
functional.
healthy tissue. How is healthy tissue a problem?
Because that
It's
healthy tissue
like
is
you're
helping
telling me
them.
to remove my eyeball because I feel like it, even though my eyeball is perfectly fine. No doctor would do that.
Genital surgery is correcting a mismatch so they can live a normal life.
Okay, but you realize, obviously not, and I don't say that to be insulting, there is nothing wrong there. It's perfectly healthy, perfectly developed in the vast majority of cases, organs in tissue. It's healthy. It's there. It's functional. No doctor would chop off your hand because you feel like it.
Well, I'm
And
saying
just
that
because it's genitals doesn't make it any different. It is unethical to destroy functional, healthy tissue and potentially ruin a person's life because they feel like it needs to be done. That's like me walking into a hospital, looking at the doctor and saying, doc, my right arm has served me well for years, but I feel like it's a real pain in the ass. And the doctor just agrees to chop it off.
I mean, so what alternative course would you recommend for these non-affirming, non-accept, like, I mean, gender questioning youth, like, if they don't have treatment, then it's not going to affect the likelihood that whether they'll experience um, their gender identity in adolescence and adulthood. Um, I think that, like, you talked about, like, taking them to a psychiatric institution, but I don't know of any controls of any studies that have investigated those types of interventions and see them as having any influence on the person's gender identity. Like, I think that um, it like, I think that modern criteria makes it clear that that basically that people are just going to be happy and well-adjusted transgender people when they have that course of treatment than if they don't have an accepting course of treatment.
So happy and well adjusted is defined within the scope of high suicide rates, high complication rates, high return doctor visits, having to literally keep open your festering wound that some sicko doctor has labeled a vagina even though it's not and never will be. I mean, really, transgender men don't become women, transgender women don't become men, all become weird mutilated facsimiles who are LARPing is this identity and then end up killing themselves because they're not happy about it.
Well, even if I accept your premise, I'm also considering that, like, gender nonconforming youth, if they go through things like behavioral modification to train them into a certain social gender stereotype, antipsychotic drugs, institutionalization, electroconvulsive therapy, like, those
I
things
don't
are going to,
electrocuting people.
but those things aren't going to, those are just, like, ineffective and harmful things that.
So putting people in an institution with professionals who care about their mental well-being is somehow bad, but destroying healthy living organs and then having to keep a festering wound open with a dilator that's very likely to kill you eventually is good?
I'm saying that treatments are that the
Treatments that
medical
kill
treatments.
you a lot of the time.
I mean, it would kill them if they didn't opt for what is usually reversible puberty blockers and taking an approach that does lead to positive. I do think that an approach that's currently being used for trans people is going to lead to a positive and healthy outcome because it doesn't like accept this cultural norm of blindly pushing children into cisgenderism.
Well, wait a second.
But
When we talk about accepting cultural norms, sorry to jump on you, James.
no, go ahead.
When we talk about accepting cultural norms, you said at the beginning or earlier in the conversation, Farrelei, that it would be a mistake to judge that somebody was a man just because they had a penis or a woman just because they have a vagina. Is that your point of view?
Yes.
Okay, well, if that's the case, then what's the point of sexual transitioning anyway? Aren't these transgender people just conforming to cultural norms when they try to do a sex change? Why can't they just be female but have the body they were born with? If it's a male body, or male but have the female body they were born with and not go through any kind of body modification or alteration in order to make themselves pass as a more culturally female or culturally male person? What's the point of the sex change?
Well, I would say that illustrating that if they didn't do that, then if they didn't go through medical transition, then it would illustrate their gender as being limited to their mind or something that's all in their head. And so then it would say, and then people would say that it's like a mere whim or something that can't be seen or felt. And so that will isolate their gender from their physical sex and give people the impression that the physical changes that they transition to are irrelevant and that they're just forever male or female regardless of whether their bodies reflect that.
But wait a second, how can bodies reflect being male and female? I thought you said that bodies could not reflect maleness or femaleness. Because a penis is not a sign of being male and a vagina is not a sign of being a woman. So how do bodies reflect gender?
I can't answer that.
So then I would postulate, without trying to be rude, that if you can't answer it, it seems really rather irresponsible to promote doing it to children who are by far the most vulnerable people in our societies.
Okay, well, I mean, what I'm trying to say when I said that we shouldn't define it based on them having a penis or vagina, I just mean that like I don't know. I just said that because because I feel like a lot of cis people they kind of focus on genitals, and so I don't really feel like it's anyone's job to just look at whether we look the way you think they should, and it's not like and expect them to work to put into work to being passing. I think that it's just kind of a personal decision whether someone wants to change themselves to appear um, a as the other gender in the traditional sense. And I would also say that that I think that it's not irresponsible to push this because I think that uh, trans teens who don't have affirming treatment they have catastrophic rates of homelessness. And it's because if their families and their schools and cultural institutions fail to protect their identities and validate them, then I think that data shows that they're a lot more likely to, then it's just doing a disservice to them to not give them medical treatment when they're already obviously a vulnerable youth.
Okay, so I'd respond to that by saying, if I'm a father and God forbid my daughter believes that she is a man and she wants to start taking drugs, and she wants to get her breasts cut off, and she wants to have, her womanhood torn out and reconstructed by some doctor who's making $30,000 from this surgery. I'm not going to put myself in that moral position. There is absolutely no way I'm going to make myself responsible for mutilating my own child. That is morally reprehensible to condone the mutilation of your own children. Why should any parent have to support that?
Yeah, I don't use the term mutilation in this context, and
It doesn't
I
matter.
just
You're destroying healthy tissue. That is mutilation. If I cut off my own healthy arm because I want to do it, that is mutilation. Very simple.
there are plenty of corrective surgeries that involve lacerations or invasive procedures and interventions. It's a medical
The
treatment.
corrective surgery to fix a defect. I'm talking about a healthy body. When you're asking me to condone my theoretical child mutilating a healthy body because she feels like it, that's an entirely different scenario. You're asking me to accept what is objectively, morally unacceptable by saying, absolutely destroy that beautiful feminine body that, I'm not religious, but for lack of a better term, God saw fit to grace you with. Destroy everything that's perfectly natural about your body. Mutilate yourself. I support you. No, that's wrong. That's just objectively wrong.
I feel very sorry for your theoretical child if they are not cisgender, because it would seem that they're statistically so highly likely to experience a lot of chronic issues like homelessness and substance abuse that many trans people who don't have the privilege of growing up in an affirming environment. And I just sent Ted a wonderful book that has child-friendly language and vibrant art about this topic, and so it presents it in a way that's very sensitive and doesn't use language like mutilation.
Ted, do me a favor. Tell me who that book was written by.
It's written by Teresa Thorne. And so in the book, it has some, and it in its education, it talks about.
Sorry, one sec, Farrelei. Just to further you down that path, James, the illustrator's name is Noah Grigney. Sorry, go ahead, Farrelei.
So, like, in one of the pages in the book, it talks about that it says that, like, when you were born, they didn't know what gender you were because you couldn't talk, so they just looked at you and made a guess, and sometimes they got it right and sometimes they get it wrong. And so it's okay to correct people if they get it wrong. You can say, I know you think that I'm a boy, for example, but really I feel like a girl. And so that is presenting it in a way where young people can understand, cannot get a false premise that you have presented, where people are just like born and stuck forever the sex that they were assigned at birth, and which isn't backed by facts. I mean, I know you've had your says that. Yeah.
No, please go ahead. You just said we had our say, so please finish.
But I'm saying that the overwhelming majority of data that I've seen and that the media puts out suggests that transgenderism is a medical condition, that's an inborn trait, and that it's so much healthier to affirm it than to treat it as a sickness.
Okay, but you do realize, and I'd really like you to address my previous point, that it's somehow morally acceptable for a parent, and I don't care what word you choose to assign to it, that it somehow is morally acceptable for a parent to be okay with the mutilation, the change, the transition of their child's healthy body. I mean, can I be any more clear, Ted?
No, I mean, I feel like you're asking a pretty clear question. It's like a gut-churning proposition that you're making here, Farrelei. You're asking us to swallow a pretty hefty pill here. The idea that a predatory doctor should be allowed to prey on and mutilate the body of a young person, and that we should just be okay with this. I mean, that's, I don't want to get biblical here, but that sounds evil. right? That sounds like a very evil thing for you to say, and it's weird because you don't come across as an evil person, but maybe this is just sort of the banality of the banality of evil, as they say. But I would like you to kind of make some kind of answer for yourself, because it's such an extreme. It seems like such an extreme thing that you're saying here.
I mean, I attribute all your concerns to just ignoring and misperceiving the facts about this issue, because, as I was saying, what's immoral is the alternative of rejecting their gender identity or treating them like there's something wrong with them because they are transgender.
Okay, so I would respond to that simply by saying, how is it immoral for me to not want to take part in my child damaging themselves?
Farrelei, are you religious?
I am not.
Are your parents religious at all?
No, not really.
Do you
Yeah.
have, I mean, but going back somewhere in your family history, there must be some kind of religious background. Do you just come from a long line of atheists, or?
My parents are an atheist. I mean, I'm gonna go ahead and say that my parents and are from Iran, and that's where all of my extended family lives. So it's, I mean, from pulling that, it says that it's overwhelmingly Muslim there, and I guess my parents did, have some Muslim influence in their belief. I'm not sure what they believe right now. Uh, but I mean, I know even in Iran, they recognize transgenderism as a legitimate birth condition, even as they have a death penalty instituted for homosexuality. I don't know. It's kind of complicated. I'm not sure why that is, but
Well, so are your grandparents practicing Muslims, or?
I've never met my grandparents. I'm born and raised in the States, and I have visited Iran when I was a child, but I didn't see them because they were deceased. My parents are like 45 years older than me. So, yeah, my grandparents were deceased when I was like a baby.
Gotcha, gotcha. But your family background is Muslim.
Yeah.
Have you ever been tested for autism?
Oh, no. But was evaluated by a psychologist when I was in a foster home in my teenage years, and he said that what concerns him the most about me is that I have Asperger's. And I think that I show some signs and symptoms of it, but like my parents never recognized anything wrong with me, so I was never like actually I never had long-term treatment or assessment by a mental health professional.
But you consider that that assessment was correct and that you do have Asperger's?
I'm not sure what if I do or not.
Okay. So you introduce yourself as a queer. Is that accurate? Those were your words. So I'm not trying to insult you here.
Yeah, I mean, I try to use the term genderqueer to describe myself, but there are times when I just feel like I'm too male adjacent to where I could call myself anything other than cisgender. And I think I'm just trying to separate myself from being very conventional. Like, I'm gay, and I don't know, I guess I just prefer to use the word queer to describe my sexual orientation because it's kind of all encompassing for the whole community.
Okay, so you are, and you said you're in your early 20s, right?
Yeah, I'm 23.
Okay, and you're a homosexual.
Yeah, I am.
I mean, is this something that manifests in your life, or is it just an attitude? Do you have like a partner, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's a guy who I did have a boyfriend. He's married to his husband, and um I did live with them for like several months. I met him at a gay bar, and his husband is totally cool with the relationship. Um and we were very sexually active, and we still interact like on the phone, but he's self-quarantining now, and he's a little bit older than me, like.
What a surprise.
Yeah, but I I spent months going to bars, and I went on a whole slew of hookups with people who were like 3 times my age, and so
I never could have seen that coming. I never could have predicted that you would say that. That's a
uh
complete shock to me.
I thought you were speaking sarcastically at first, but I guess you mean that.
Yeah, I guess having Asperger's would make it hard for you to pick up on whether or not somebody was being facetious. I absolutely was. So about how much older than you was this guy, were this couple of men who you lived with?
He's 64, his husband is 63.
Okay. And this was recently, or was this a while ago,
This
or?
was in January. Well, this ended in January of this year and began in around August of last year.
So, I mean, Farrelei, it sounds to me like you're a guy who you're in your early 20s.
Mhm.
You have Asperger's, which I think makes you vulnerable to begin with, but you're also young. I mean, you're in your early 20s. It seems to me like this is a very predatory situation. Like these two guys, these two older perverts have preyed on you.
I wouldn't agree with that because, well, I can't remember if he approached me first when we were at the bar, but usually, yeah, I mean, I go to bars and I'm not a very sociable person. I just kind of sit there and I buy a drink so I kind of blend in, and I just wait for someone to come up to me and talk to me and say, like, hey, I know this is fast, but do you want to come home with me for sex? And that's just something that I kind of had been doing for a long time, and he was kind of one of the first. He was the second person who I ended up like moving in with and becoming very close with. And his husband isn't like his husband says he likes me, but that he doesn't like what we're doing. But he's not really necessarily objecting to it. He said he's happy for him that he found someone who he can have sex with because his husband's libido is kind of low. He kind of his husband has a complicated past. He was a gay rights activist in San Francisco and very well known for decades, and um, had a lot of. He was very popular in the community. The city board of supervisors named the first week of February Larry Brinken Week in honor of him and his contributions to minorities, especially LGBT. And he got into some trouble because I think the I think the police got a tip about porn involving abuse of like little kids on his computer, and
He,
so
he's been charged. He's guilty of a felony of child porn possession.
he did plead guilty and he did go to jail for a while. And he's not a pedophile. His husband told me in all the years I've known Larry, I know he's not a pedophile. He said Larry is a people pleaser because was trying to he was getting the porn from pedophiles from like Australia, I think. I don't know a whole lot about it, but he was kind of subdued into it. It wasn't something like when he first saw it, he was repulsed initially, and then it was just kind of something that he was playing along with, and not something that he actually got pleasure from personally.
So I would like to really quickly read a quote and then ask a question. This is a quote from an account of Larry Brinken. I loved especially the N-word 2-year-old getting nailed. Hope you'll continue so I can see what the little blonde bitch is going to get. White power, white supremacy, white D rules.
This is why I brought that case up because this had
He
like
pled
Larry
guilty.
yeah, he has to deal with this for the rest of his life, and that hurt his sex drive. So his husband was telling me that he doesn't have sex like he used to since he got arrested and all that. And his husband and his friend told me that basically, I don't know how to explain it, that his stepdad was a total asshole to him. He was abusive, and he was channeling or mimicking what he imagined his stepfather would have said if he was looking at that porn, and his stepfather was probably a pedophile, and it's not reflective of who he is. He was a civil rights activist, and he um, handled a lot of investigations regarding discrimination against African Americans in the city, and he's the furthest thing from Marxist. He's never voted Republican in his life. He hates Trump. He pro-choice, pro everything good.
I don't give a shit about almost any of what you just said. I want to focus on the fact that he did this because of his stepfather. So I have a very simple question. Do you believe that because his stepfather abused him, that him participating in the traffic of child pornography was okay and or justified?
No, I don't believe that. I think that he made a horrible mistake, but he's otherwise a wonderful person. And they've been very good. They were very nice to me when I was living with them, and I didn't pay any rent. And I don't know, they've helped me a lot, I would say.
You described a pattern of behavior in which you would go to gay bars, get yourself a drink, and wait to get approached. And you said that you'd been doing that for a long time, in your words. About how long?
Well, I've been doing it on and off. It started when I was 21, and I went to San Francisco, and I didn't intend to do this. I was just kind of visiting the Castro area, and I started to just kind of wander into bars, and all of a sudden some guy is really intoxicated, and he started to, like, I don't know, feel me and kiss me, and then he got us an Uber to his place, and
So he assaulted you in a bar?
well, I liked it, so I wouldn't call it assault because I consented. And I would say, though, that I have been assaulted at bars because the guys there, they don't, like, a lot of them don't ask before they touch you, but it's not a problem for me. And so and then I just kind of went the next night after I left his apartment. The next night I went back and I said, I'm going to do this because I don't want to burn all my savings on hotels or hostels. I want to spend my nights with these men. I don't know anyone in the city. I didn't know anyone in the city back then, so it gave me a way for me to kind of get closer to people. So it was and it worked without fail. Like every single night, I would basically meet someone new, and a lot of the people, a lot of the men, I wasn't particularly interested in, but I still went home with them because I didn't have anyone else at the time. Or but now, like on the last time I was in San Francisco for August to January, I did kind of make a friend who lived in a nearby city, and he was always available to pick me up and take me to his place without any sexual expectations. Um, uh, if I didn't like meet someone at a bar who wanted to have sex with me, which did happen a few times on my last duration of stay. But
So
when it started, it was working consistently.
so I'm struggling to find the words. So this community, this lifestyle, this, which to my knowledge is very consistent with what I've heard from most of the homosexual people I know and have read about, this community of what sounds like very dangerous behavior of going home with random people who grope you in bars is something that you want to slowly indoctrinate children into, and it's somehow immoral for me not wanting to support this. Is that the base? Is that the nitty gritty of it here?
I support having children being raised as possibly agender or not having strict gender roles
But that
assigned to
wasn't my
children.
question, though.
Yeah, but I don't know. Like, I wouldn't say like that this is appropriate for children. Like, there are children in the Castro. There's an elementary school in the Castro named after um, the gay rights activist who was assassinated at City Hall in the 70s. So it's like this isn't inappropriate for children to learn about, but it's not something that they should participate in. Like they obviously shouldn't go into bars and have sex.
Right. That isn't. I didn't mean like literally grab a child and take them into a bar. No. I meant, do you view it as okay to slowly teach and acclimate children to what is obviously an unhealthy environment? I mean, I can't imagine with all the things you believe that whether or not you personally consent to it, it's okay to be randomly groped by people, and then because you have nowhere to go sleep with them in order to have somewhere to stay.
Yeah, I wouldn't use the words that you used, but I guess
Well,
basically
quite
I
frankly,
understand what you're trying to ask me, and I would say yes. I do think that that's a good thing for children, and it's not for everyone, but I think that it provides more opportunities for LGBT people to feel more open, so that they don't feel like pressured to be closeted for a long time, which I view as more damaging to mental health than anything.
So again, to ask a very basic question, it's better to be open and what I view as endangered than it is to be what you would call closeted.
Yeah, and I would correct a comment that you made earlier about not having anywhere else to go. Like, it wasn't that I needed to do that, because it was more that I kind of wanted to do it because I wanted to feel like I needed sexual intimacy because, I don't know, it just made me feel fulfilled to do that, and it provided a way for me to meet people in the city, so that I had people, so that I felt like I was getting grounded in San Francisco, and I it wasn't necessary. Like, I could have probably, rented hotel rooms for months and just burn all the money I saved, but I just saw it as a wise decision to just kind of, sleep with guys that are interested in bars and use that.
Farrelei, you said the first time this happened to you, you were 21.
Yeah, that's correct. I was like 15 when I downloaded Grinder app, and so I slept with old men then. But 21 was the first time when I went to San Francisco, when I went to a gay bar, and when I was approached in person by someone who was interested in
So
having.
I have yet another very simple question. So you believe it's morally justifiable for 15-year-old boys who are incredibly impressionable and hormonal and don't know what they're doing with their lives to sleep with men who are twice to three times their age?
That's a complicated issue. I mean, I don't like
I disagree. It's
regard
very
it
straightforward. It's
as
very straightforward.
I don't like think that it's like it should be. I don't think it should be a crime for an adult to have consensual sex. I think that a 15-year-old should be able to legally consent to sex with an adult, and that's really in most of like first world countries in Europe, they usually have it at about 15 or 14, where people can have sex with like adults or anyone older
I
than.
know that doesn't make it right, though. That
Yeah, but
doesn't
I'm
more
Well,
than
so wait
justify.
a second. Farrelei, where would you draw the line of consent? What would the age of consent be in Farrelei world?
I mean, I think that it should be about someone's level of maturity, not necessarily their age, but I think that for simplification purposes, I guess we should have a strict age of consent. So I would say maybe 15 is about a good age, but 14 and 16 aren't bad either. I wouldn't be totally objecting to that. 15 is about a good age where it should be acceptable to have sex with someone older than you.
Do you remember when your first sexual experience was and how old you were?
Okay. I don't want to get into this, but it's like, yeah, I don't want to reinforce stereotypes that people have about gays being molested and becoming gays, which is why I didn't want to talk about Larry at first. But
I do hate to break it to you, but it's a little too late for that. So
yeah,
Well, wait a
yeah,
second. Yeah, let him talk. I feel like this is where a breakthrough moment here,
yeah,
James. Go ahead,
yeah.
Farrelei.
I did kind of have a family member who might have um, groped me or stripped me when I was about 6.
No way.
Yeah.
Get out of here. That can't be.
I'm shocked. I'm blown away.
Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, I don't want to make too much light of this because that's a really awful thing. That's a really, really awful thing that would happen to you, and I really do genuinely feel sorry for you. A lot of the things you've said, a lot of the things you've told us about yourself make me feel very sorry for you.
Well, I honestly like people to feel sorry for me because it makes me feel like I'm cared about.
You feel like when people feel sorry for you, it makes you feel like they care?
Yeah.
Do you think that most people don't care about you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because I kind of I feel like most of the guys who I go out with, like at bar, like who I go home with at bars, I feel like they most of the time, like there are exceptions, like the married couple and another guy who I was dating for several weeks. But most guys, like they just kind of have sex with you, and from my experience, and then when the morning comes, they're really hungover, and they just say like, "Oh, I'm gonna have to kick you out now," and that was fun. We should do this again sometime. And then they just kind of escorted me out of their place, and I never heard from them again. And if I saw them again at a bar, they would just kind of say, "Oh, hi," and they wouldn't like act like we ever did anything. And
So you
it
were
would be
hoping
like,
for
yeah,
you were hoping to make a connection, to find a friend.
yeah. I was hoping. Well, more than that, I was kind of hoping to get married. And I did have one person say that he's kind of psychic. This was one of the first guys I met at a bar when I was 21, and he said that he told me not to take it the wrong way, but he said, I'm kind of psychic, and I had a feeling when I saw you that we were going to get married, and he was telling me that he was going to um, help me get settled into San Francisco, and that I should drop out of college and like move in with him, which I did for a couple weeks, but that didn't work out, and so
Did you drop
yeah,
out of college?
yeah, I mean, yeah. Which, by the way, I'm like graduating in like this month.
Well, congratulations. That's good. What did you study? What is your degree in?
It's a bachelor's degree in nursing.
Okay, that's healthy. That's a healthy thing to study. It seems like nurses are in high demand right now. Do you have good job prospects?
Yeah, I'm hopeful because I know that the mayor of San Francisco had waived some of the requirements that nurses had previously needed to be hired. But I'm a little bit nervous because I've never really worked in healthcare, and I don't like I have a friend like one of the guys who I slept with at a bar in San Francisco was a nurse, and he said that when I graduate and pass NCLEX, he will get me a job where he works. And he said that I would easily make six-figure salaries and that it would set me up for a lot of financial stability. So I am planning to contact him and say like, hey, can you help me? Because I don't feel comfortable submitting my own applications and going out for interviews because I get a little bit nervous and unsure of myself, and I don't like job interviews because I don't like answering questions.
Well, you're doing a good job of answering ours, and I just want to. I'm not trying to tell you you're wrong, right? Your feelings, like if you feel like job interviews unnerve you, I can't be like, no, you don't actually feel that way. That would be stupid. But I just want to give you what I hope would be like a useful counter narrative. Job interviews can be really fun. And the difference, in my opinion, between seeing them as something fun and seeing them as something unnerving has to do with your mindset. I think that you have it within you to adapt a mindset that would make you more successful at them. So the reason why I'm saying this is not to tell you that your feelings aren't valid about being nervous about job interviews, but just don't think that you need to rely on some guy you meet at a bar who wants you to have sex with him to get a job. Okay?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it stemmed from me knowing a friend or me having a friend who grew up in Westboro Baptist Church who happens to be a nurse. He's out of that church now and not affiliated with them, but he said that when he graduated nursing school, he had a hard time finding his first job because most employers were looking for previous nursing experience, which he lacked, and so he was only able to get a job. He said because his family member who worked at a local hospital put in a good word.
This contact that you have, what kind of institution does he work at?
In Westboro, from Westboro or from San Francisco?
The San Franciscan guy who said he could hook you up.
He works in the emergency department at the Zuckerberg Hospital in the city.
Okay. As long as you're not working at a children's hospital, I think it would be really healthy for you to find work as a nurse. I think that would help you out a lot.
Hard agree for me, Ted.
I mean, yeah, I'm hoping for that.
Look, Farrelei, you said that you feel like most people don't care about you. That really touched my heart because, I understand what it's like to feel lonely. Can I ask about your parents? Do you have any contact with your parents?
Uh, I don't really speak to my parents very often. I try to avoid them, but uh, I did like live with them on and off until recently. So, I mean, I yeah, I have depended on them a lot too.
Why do you try to avoid them?
Um, I think that it kind of starts when I think back to when I was about 13 and the whole thing about me being abused came up, allegedly being abused, and that um, that kind of I saw a psychologist who was like saying your parents are abusive, and I was in a foster home, and so I just feel like I associate negativity with my parents, and it helps me to get to heal or get away from 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 feeling like I have hurt or damage if I don't speak to them.
Were your parents abusive toward you?
Um, that's not something that I'm sure about because my friend and the guy who I lived with who was married, he told me that people are weird about children and being abused, and he said that he was molested when he was 7 and that he liked it. And um, I mean, my parents maybe I don't know if what they did qualifies as sexual abuse because um, more of the groping and touching thing had to do with a sibling. Um, but like, yeah, my parents probably. I guess if I told you a lot of information about things that happened in my home life when I was growing up, you would say that my parents were abusive.
But you had an older sibling who sexually molested you?
Yeah,
How much older than you was your sibling?
7.5 years.
So then when you were a 7-year-old, they would have been like a 14-year-old.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, and that did help them to not get into a lot of trouble is because I think that they were kind of going with the story that it only happened when you know we were minors and it wasn't like an adult child.
Was that story true?
It wasn't exactly true, but it was mostly true. Like I don't remember it that well.
God help us. This is dark. I mean, you come across somebody like you, right? Saying the things that you say, which you saw how James reacted to what you were saying. That sort of visceral disgust. I think that's a fair thing to say, James, that you expressed a very visceral disgust. I come across somebody like you, Farrelei, who says these like just really horrifying things, these things that are really, to be honest, to me, just very scary. More than anything else, it really scares me to hear somebody say the age of consent should be 14, specifically that the age of consent for a boy and a man, right, a homosexual relationship should be 14, is especially terrifying, and that young children, it should be acceptable to give them hormone blockers so that they don't go through puberty, so that they can decide whether or not they want to get a sex change operation. These are really, really scary things for me to hear somebody saying. But, you know, I get this background, this biographical information about you. Don't you think that maybe the reason why you're so different and why your views are so different and so outlandish might have something to do? And by the way, outlandish is a word I used with the previous guest, but I want to qualify that. This is on an order of magnitude beyond anything. This is not a charming eccentricity, right? So our previous guest is a guy who I would consider a charming eccentric. He has views that I would consider to be unusual, but they're sort of charmingly unusual, and he's intelligent and erudite enough to like sort of make his case, even if his case is kind of wacky. You're somebody who's saying things that are just horrifying. Do you think maybe your early life experiences led you down this path? Don't you think that that's a possibility, that that's why you've sort of become this person who's so different?
I can't comment on that because I don't know how I feel. I don't know what I believe about it. It's all very complicated.
I would respond to that by saying, if you don't know personally how you feel and you feel it's complicated, these horrible things that have happened to you, especially when you were younger, that have really drilled into the center of my being. Don't you think it's ill-advised to promote the same unfortunate lifestyle to people who are in their formative years? Don't you knowingly risk damaging other people?
Well, I actually would, like, I don't personally, I'll just say that I don't personally ever foresee myself having children because
Oh, thank
I
God.
don't, but I would like to, only mostly for the fact that I would want to raise a child by queer parents or in an environment that that teaches tolerance. Uh, and so uh, I don't even know if I remember what you were asking. Um,
That because you don't know how you feel about your objectively unfortunate youth and adolescence, that it's somehow advisable to promote that people follow a path using the same ideology that you adhere to. I mean, you do realize the vast majority, the absolute vast majority of queers, homosexuals, helicopters, whatever you want to call them, have the same general backstory as you. This is a cycle. This is cyclical.
yeah, I mean, I was a bit saddened about Larry telling me that he had been abused as a child because it made me think that he was kind of, I don't know, like validating a lot of stereotypes that.
But then didn't Larry validate, no matter how good a person you imagine Larry to be, didn't Larry validate stereotypes by distributing and pleading guilty to distributing child pornography? I mean, it's a
Yeah.
cycle. Your own story has proven the cyclical nature of this.
I also want to jump in on, didn't you say that Larry told you that when he was molested as a child that he liked it?
That was his husband who told me that.
That was Wood Massey?
Yeah, well, his first name is Richard, but he goes by his middle name Wood.
So both Larry Brinken and Wood Massey and you, so far all three of the characters in this story have had early childhood molestation experiences.
I mean, I don't know if Larry was sexually abused. I don't know a lot of information about what his stepdad did to him. Wood told me that his husband was an asshole and that he put, from what I remember, something about making him put his dirty underwear on his face as a way to punish him and inhale and things like that, and that he was very verbally abusive to Larry.
That his husband did this or his father?
His step, yeah, his stepdad, or Larry's stepdad abused Larry.
Okay, so this was what Larry's stepdad did to him.
Yeah.
So then, but then Wood also had an early molestation experience that he said he enjoyed.
Yeah, he said that he liked it.
So do you think by saying that he was in some way indicating that sometimes the molestation of a young child is justified or okay?
I asked him, like, specifically if he thinks that that's acceptable, and he said, like, I'm not, he said he's not a pedophile, but that, like, when this happened, we had this conversation when I first met him at the bar. He wanted to see my driver's license because he wasn't sure if I was under 21. And so he was saying, like, I don't want to go to prison for 10 years because I had sex with someone who was a minor, and that people are so weird about it, they overreact, and that he said that they shouldn't go to prison for 10 years for that type of act, that it should be taken less seriously. Maybe he means it shouldn't be a felony, it should be a misdemeanor. I don't know.
I can tell you that people who abuse children get far worse sentences in other countries outside the West, and usually they're pretty. I mean, I can't imagine a world where you say, "Oh yeah, I abused your kid, but I don't deserve to go to jail for 10 years." Do you not understand that even by being involved in this, you are contributing to a cycle of child abuse?
I mean, I think that I don't know if those things are related. I think that it could just be that we all kind of relate to each other in the way that we're all gay, and we all experienced suffering in our childhoods.
So did most gay people. It's a cycle. Your own story has proven it by saying, and me remembering immediately that Brinken was associated with distributing child pornography. I mean, he contributed to the cycle. Your own story proves the cyclical nature of this.
Yeah, and this is why, like, if you go online and you look up Larry Brinken, you're not going to find his version of the story. So most people don't know it, and so a lot of people, like,
But
they
wait,
have anger because they think that, like as I was saying, that his actions reinforce terrible stereotypes that established society has against us, and it's not that like the reason that he was making those comments is because I think it was linked to his stepfather, but I don't think that that's the reason that he's gay or that like Larry, he has a son, a biological son who he had through with a lesbian couple via in vitro fertilization, and he was never abused, and he's not even LGBT like we are. So it's not like.
Gee, what a surprise the guy who wasn't abused turned out to be.
Yeah, I mean, again, your own story is proving the general cyclical nature of this.
So, Farrelei, you said that the reason why people were upset with Brinken was because he was reinforcing a stereotype?
Yeah, because he played a big role in his past. He had a big role in San Francisco's gay history. He was like allegedly. I was told that he is the first person who coined the term domestic partnership, and he helped like get gay rights advanced up to a point. Like he got the ball rolling for gay rights or legal recognition of gay relationships.
I mean, I think the reason why they were upset with him probably had less to do with him reinforcing a stereotype than it did with him sharing child pornography. I think that was probably the reason why people were mostly upset.
Yeah,
what do you think about that? Do you think that that's possible? Does it sound plausible to you?
Yeah, that does sound like what Wood told me. His husband, he said that a lot of people dropped Larry. He had a lot of friends in the city, and a lot of people are so sensitive about, anything to do with children and sex that they just saw it as a crime that he can't be redeemed from. And so, but a lot of people also did come to his defense and say that this isn't Larry, and that they recognize that he did a lot for minorities. His husband thinks that he probably was subdued into it by some type of elaborate scheme.
It doesn't matter. He still did it.
Yeah, I know. And he said that his husband at first was turned off by it, but his husband said that he could see how devastated Larry was when he got arrested, and that he couldn't even speak, and because he was so upset. And so he suffered a lot after his arrest. And so I feel like it's a very unfortunate situation all around because a lot of parties suffered on both sides. And we lost a voice in the community because Larry, he doesn't speak publicly about in favor of gay rights because people are always going to associate him with the porn thing. Wood told me that at first he was questioning his relationship with Larry and whether or not Larry was a good person. And a lot of people told him to break up with Larry. He's a horrible person, but he told me he can't leave Larry because Larry needs him. And I told him it was admirable that he was able to stay in this relationship in spite of this challenge that came up.
This is the guy who is married to Larry and also having sex with you.
Yeah. And he calls
me
sometimes for phone sex.
He calls you sometimes even now for phone sex?
Yeah, he does.
I feel at this stage of the conversation that we're almost. I'm trying to find a diplomatic way to put this. Ted and I are very interested in intellectual conversation, and certainly a portion of this was intellectual and a portion of this was emotional. But the liberal attitude you're taking toward the information you're giving us is almost convincing me that we're kind of, are we enabling you to, be able to attract attention by doing this? Is this show an attention grabbing mechanism?
Yeah, I mean, when I agreed to come on the stream, I thought I would probably just come on for a few minutes because I don't actually have a lot of background about transgender rights. It's something I believe in. So I wasn't expecting to go into this, but honestly, I don't know why, but it is something that I'm not looking for attention. I'm actually a bit embarrassed, and I have been since I started this chat. But I also feel strangely proud of my activity at gay bars and about this guy Larry because it makes me feel like I found what I wanted because he told me that I mean a lot to him and that he loves me, and those are things that I felt like I had been needing to have.
But you think it's advisable to seek love from a pedophile? That doesn't register it as unhealthy to you?
I don't regard them as pedophiles, and I don't think I don't
They're very
believe that they're
clearly
dishonest.
pedophile.
You don't know them personally, like you haven't.
It doesn't matter if I don't. This is just like
Yeah,
Larry
Farrelei,
is
like you could do a quick Google search of this guy, and there's news articles saying that he was sharing material which had children between the ages of 1 and 3 being sodomized and forced to perform oral sex.
Yeah, and Larry's husband told me that he probably thought that the images were photoshopped because he's not very tech savvy. Like they're an older generation. So they were saying that was also the reason why Larry even got into this is because he didn't understand that this can be traced and you can get into trouble. So he
was okay with sharing child porn if he thought he wasn't going to get caught.
Well, he probably, I don't know, I was told that he probably thought that they were fake images that were created by Photoshop and weren't actually real. I trust them because they've trusted me in a lot of ways.
You're having sex with the guy. You're being preyed on, dude. You're getting preyed on. You are somebody who's very socially maladjusted. You were molested at a young age. You have Asperger's. These guys are 3 times your age, right? And Wood is having sex with you, and he's even still calling you now for phone sex. You are getting preyed on by perverts.
I wanted to add to that when I said that he called me phone sex because, like, he does stay in contact and he does have phone sex, but it's not like he also was like writing about, or he also tells me that he wants to know about, school plans, adventures. He had said that he wanted to take me to West Hollywood over my spring break this semester before the quarantine thing, and we were going to do that. And he said that I didn't need to worry about paying for anything and that he would cover everything. And he said that he wanted to go to parks with me and just like explore greater Los Angeles. And well, a lot of it wasn't related to having sex, even though that was included in the plan.
I'm about to sound like Ted here. You have a product he wants, and he's willing to buy that product off you.
His husband isn't getting anything. Larry isn't getting anything out of the relationship. I've never even seen Larry naked, and they don't even we didn't even share a bedroom. Like Larry, I don't know. He had some upstairs bedroom in the condo, and I was downstairs, and I had to sleep in the guest bedroom sometimes because Wood said that he had trouble sleeping when I was in his bed. So sometimes I just kind of didn't like. I don't know where I was going with that, but
what Larry gets out of it is obvious, man. He's a social pariah. He's turned himself into a hated figure, a villain that any normal person would stay far away from. So
Well,
the fact that you even would accept having like a normal human interaction with him is a huge bonus for Larry. But then, too, the fact that you placate his husband Wood is also what he's getting out of it, because the husband presents it as this like selfless thing, like, well, I had to stay with Larry because he needs me. But now it's given him a license to have sex with a much younger man because he knows that Larry has no alternatives. Because Larry is a fucking pariah, because the guy was trafficking pornographic images of 2-year-olds.
yeah, I mean, what Larry did was wrong, but I wanted to just make the point, like I was saying about Photoshop, like, I mean, if it was like if Larry had assumed that it was fantasy fiction, then even if you think that it was disturbing and disgusting and wouldn't appeal to a normal person, which it didn't appeal to him, is what I was told. Um, like I have personal fantasies that would be found disturbing to others too, and I just think that if it's merely fantasy, no matter how disgusting that fantasy is, it is just fantasy and it's constitutionally protected. So I don't think that, but I mean, it probably wasn't fantasy, maybe it was real, but I mean, I was told that this was assumed to be an extreme taste in fantasy, and it was a misunderstanding.
Yeah, I could say I'm once again shocked by this revelation here that you have dark sexual fantasies. I never would have thought that a homosexual would have dark and disturbing sexual fantasies that most people would be horrified by. Never would have occurred to me.
Yeah, I mean, I was kicked out of a taxi cab in San Francisco, of all places, because I was making Larry, or no, Wood. He kind of, we were driving to a movie. We were taking a cab to a movie theater, and he started to like make out with me. And the cab driver stopped the car and said the car is broken, and he made us get out of the car. And that was surprising to me in San Francisco because I had come to San Francisco because I thought that it was like, I don't know, I thought the vast majority of people were okay with gay people. But maybe he was creeped out because I was young and Larry or Wood is 74. I lied about his age earlier. I took off 10 years. Wood is 74 and Larry is 73. I said they were 64 and 63 because I was ashamed. Didn't want to say that I was having sex with a 74-year-old.
But you do realize that whether or not it was because you're a homosexual or because they're obvious perverts or because you're young or because they're old or any cross combination thereof, I mean, the taxi driver reacted like a normal person. I wouldn't have even told you the car was broke down. I mean, he did you a courtesy.
And it's funny because I've gone into Ubers and taxi cabs with men in the Castro dozens of times, and the drivers either always ignore it or they will kind of make fun, like, oh yeah, make me hard, that's so hot, and they've kind of play along with it. And so it kind of caught me off guard, and it probably was because of the age difference, because even though I did go, like, all the men who I went home with at bars were older than me, they were usually like between the ages of 30s to 60s. I've never been involved with someone who was in their 70s before Wood.
Is there much left to say here, Ted?
Well, here's the thing. I really feel bad for you, Farrelei, because you said that you feel like most people don't care about you. Obviously, you're a pervert and you have these sort of perverted sexual proclivities, right? But it seems to me like what you're really looking for here when you describe your lifestyle is you're looking for somebody to be your friend. The reason why you're so loyal to Wood and Larry is because you perceive them as friends. And the complaint that you have is that you have these like one night stands with other men, and then they, in your words, escort you out of their homes in the morning, and then they pretend or they sort of act as if they barely know you when you see them again in the future. Your defense of Larry and Wood is that they're going to do nice things for and with you. They're going to take you places and spend money on you, and it's not purely sexual, it's just out of sort of friendly interest. A guy who is trying to convince you to have sex with him is not your friend, right? That's an evil thing to do, and you don't do evil things to your friends. You don't try to hurt your friends, you try to help them. It would be a bit self-serving for me to say to you, "Hey, I'll be your friend," right? I mean, it would just be unrealistic for me to say that I was your friend. I'm not somebody you know. James isn't somebody you know. But I can say that I care about you. 100% I can say I care about you. This whole story has been just heartbreaking for me to listen to. From you being molested at a young age to you being taken advantage of now as somebody who's very obviously extremely neuroatypical. Just from talking to you, as soon as I started talking to you, it became obvious. The ebb and flow of the conversation broke against the seawall of your obliviousness to very obvious social cues. This is a textbook signifier of autism. I'm not saying these things to insult you. I'm saying these things because I want to be the only person in your life who's willing to be honest with you, which I think is something that you've experienced a dearth of. Your stated purpose in coming on here was to tell us how to live our lives differently, and specifically how to be less transphobic. But the problem is that you know a tree by its fruits, and the life that you live is horrifying. The last thing that I want to do is be more like you. And I think that these things can coincide. I can both feel very scared by you and feel very sorry for you. If you ever want to reach out, and I mean this 100% sincerely, and this is not a way to create content for the show. This has gone beyond that now. If you ever want to reach out to me on Skype, if you ever just need somebody to talk to, please feel free to do so. But know that I am going to be coming at this from the perspective of somebody who does not think that this is healthy and someone who is not going to condone this degenerate behavior. This is really sick. And I think that you are young enough to where you could really turn your life around and find some healthy friends who aren't trying to get sexual gratification out of you, but just want what's in your best interests. And I hope if you're able to develop a nursing career, that will be an environment in which you can cultivate those kinds of friends. I hope that you can find in your very near-term future a social environment where you are not meeting people on the basis of a mutual interest in homosexual sex, because that's just going down a spiral of very unhealthy living here. It's scary to me. I feel scared for you, and I feel scared of you. I'm scared that you are going to continue this cycle, that someday you'll be the one molesting some kid, and I'm scared that you'll continue to be taken advantage of, which is I think is exactly what's happening here. You're being taken advantage of by creepy older perverts. But all that being said, and that perspective being out on the table, my cards are on the table here. You understand that I'm coming at this not from a place of acceptance, not from a place of tolerance, from a place of pure disgust. I still care about you. I 100% mean it. If you ever want to reach out privately, if you feel like you'd like to talk to somebody who's outside of your world just to get a reality check on where you are and what you're doing, please feel free to reach out because I'm really concerned about you, man.
I mean, I think that it's kind of unbelievable that this agreement somehow managed to emerge despite the differences between us, because when I had gotten onto the Skype chat, I thought that I would be almost immediately rejected, and I was not expecting to get into a lot of the things that I talked about here, because I mean, I kept expecting you to hate me or not care about me, because I thought that you hate all queer people, because I thought that I had heard in a previous stream on Politics of 3 channel that James might have said that you hate gays, and then you had said that you wanted the Castro to be annihilated somehow.
Well, there's
buddy.
always satire involved in the show. Ted, I can speak for very readily, is, and I say this in the most positive of lights, the most kind, caring, devoutly Christian Catholic man that I have ever met. And I guess I'm not saying like Maybe I am. Ted is an absolutely wonderful person, and even though he might make a joke one minute to make his friends laugh, but then in the next minute, Ted may genuinely and I shouldn't even say does genuinely care about maybe the people who were involved in his satire. Ted is above and beyond in the realm of being a very moral person.
James,
Yeah.
I have a tear in my eye right now for those kind words. I only wish I could say anything kind in return.
Well, it's okay, Ted. I don't expect it.
Now, Farrelei, I want you to pay close attention here. That was a joke. That's what we call a joke, right? So actually, James, I think you know this. So James is somebody who I have a lot of love and respect for. And I absolutely would love to take the opportunity right now to extol his virtues as an extremely intelligent, sort of obscenely accomplished, like almost comically accomplished person for his age. Somebody who I managed to look up to, even though I'm like a good decade his senior, right? But this is what we do on the show is we tell jokes. And I understand, I said earlier that you're somebody who has trouble picking up on social cues. And I don't think you would, I hope that you don't take that as an insult. It's just an observation, right? But because I've made that observation, it would be unfair for me to now castigate you for not being able to differentiate when I'm joking and when I'm serious. Not only do I not hate gays, I literally think it's unhealthy to hate anybody. It's not just that it's unhealthy for the targets of your hate. Obviously, for somebody to be hated is not healthy for them, but it's especially unhealthy for the person who's doing the hating. So just so we're clear, I don't think it's right to go around hating anybody, but this is a show where we're trying to entertain people. And because of that, we say exaggerated or extreme things. They're called jokes.
Yeah, and I really feel like that. I mean, I know that it's kind of comparing apples to oranges, but um, you know, I feel like I view that in a similar way that I view Larry's comments on the porn is that when people are trying to be erotic, they might say things that they don't really, that shouldn't be taken to heart. And so, like, I mean, I had seen an interview where this was maybe 4 years ago where you had gotten some sort of media attention because you had used a gay slur on Twitter and you had said that you don't hate gays, but a lot of people are going to assume that if you say faggot, then you must hate gays not in the same way, but also people are going to assume that Larry is a racist or a pedophile because he said nigger or that he was praising porn in the
To be
context
fair,
of
he's a convicted, self-admitted pedophile.
Yeah, he pled guilty, bro. I mean, don't even try to compare me to him. To say that I make a joke or use the word faggot and that's the same as like a guy who shares kiddie porn.
yeah.
Listen to what you're saying. Like, listen to the moral equivalency that you're making here.
I was saying that I see a similarity, but I know that they're very different contexts.
There is not even a similarity. Here would be the scenario in which it would be analogous, all right? Larry Brinken traffics child pornography. He comments on the child porn that he makes comments indicating his sexual arousal. Then later on, he says, I'm not really a pedophile. That would be like if I murdered a guy, and then later on I said, I'm not really a murderer. I killed that one guy, but that's not who I am. That would be a fair analogy.
Yeah, but you are assuming that Larry enjoyed it and that he wasn't just trying to please a crowd, because that's what I was told is that was part of his
Doesn't
motive is
make it any
pleasing
better,
people.
though.
Yeah, I'm not assuming anything. I'm not going to try to assume anything about the complex psychological motivations of a pederast. What I'm doing is I'm describing a pattern of behavior. Now, come on, man. Can you admit that the pattern of behavior, at least, is a real thing? Because what I'm hearing here, Farrelei, to be honest with you, what I'm hearing is a guy who's in denial. You're somebody who's out there in a state of extreme loneliness. You're so lonely that you're like going to these gay bars and clutching at any little straws you can get from people who are like, somebody uses some like corny line on you where they're like, hey, I'm a psychic and don't take this the wrong way, but I have a vision of us getting married. That's clearly a pickup line, but you're remembering this and like thinking to yourself, man, I would like to get married, right? You're in a state of debilitating loneliness. Then these people take you in, one of whom is an admitted, pled guilty trafficker in child porn, a pedophile, by his actions, pled fucking guilty. And you're making these excuses for the guy because you're in a state of denial because you don't want to lose this. This is the one like relationship that you have that you feel like is a friendship, and you don't want to have to admit these people are really unhealthy. These people are toxic, because then if you admitted that, you'd be forced back into that state of loneliness where you don't have any friends.
Yeah. I mean, it's true, but I've spoken to many people who know Larry, and everyone I've spoken to said he's a wonderful man.
Oh my
regardless
God,
of-
fucking stop, dude. Stop. Stop. There's nothing you can say. This guy is toxic, dude. And I know it's hard. The best thing for you would be to stay far away from this guy.
Well, we were planning to be close together after I moved to San Francisco and hopefully got a job as a nurse in the city. Um, he was hoping that, well, Wood was hoping that we would be very compatible again. He thinks that we get along really well, and I know that's not a surprise to you, but this is kind of what I've been planning for several months this semester, is to get as close to Wood as possible, which is why I was very eager to go to West Hollywood before the quarantine to be able, because I thought if we traveled to, to LA together, then he would be even closer to me.
So you're confirming my thesis. My thesis is that what you're really longing for is closeness to another human being. And so you're subjecting yourself to these toxic relationships as a means to getting that closeness. And what I'm telling you is that you don't need to do that. Somebody who's really your friend is somebody who's just going to be your friend without asking you to be comfortable spending time with a pedophile, or be comfortable being sodomized, or be comfortable with any other like way in which you would be victimized. The older relative who molested you, that wasn't like a way for you to win their friendship, right?
No.
No, so neither is this. These people aren't your friends. Again, these people are preying on you. So, like I said before, I'm not going to offer to be your friend because that would be very hollow. That would be a very hollow thing to say. I live on the other side of the country from you. We've never met. We're having a remote conversation over the internet. It would be almost like a mean-spiritedly meaningless or empty thing for me to say, oh, I'll be your friend. But in a way, I kind of wish I could say that, because you need to find a healthy friend. And I think the best case scenario for you is to do that in your nursing career. I think that people with your condition, meaning people with Asperger's, are at a severe disadvantage because, in general, normies shun people who are very socially maladjusted. They shun people who aren't sort of good at like conversational fluidity. And I think that's you, buddy. I think that's you just from talking to you. And because of that, I can see why you would find yourself in a situation where you feel like you don't have a lot of friends. But there's a better solution than going to gay bars.
Okay, yeah, this is kind of what my life revolves around, so I don't know what I'm going to take from this conversation. Um, in general, I feel very unsure of myself and what I'm doing in my life, so.
No kidding.
And I'm also someone who tends to just go along with what people say, which is a concern I had when coming on the stream, is because I knew that I was coming from a place where you two disagreed with. Even I think the other guest that was here earlier, who lives like in the north coast of California, he doesn't strike me as particularly progressive. Which he should be. I try to think of like states like California and Massachusetts as being very educated, and then that translates to them being knowledgeable about trans issues. So that's why they're more likely to support LGBT people.
So the reason why we're horrified by the things that you've described, the reason why we're horrified by the molestation of children, the reason why we're horrified by gross sexual predation is because we're not educated enough?
I'm saying that your lack of knowledge about LGBT issues is kind of separating you from people who are more progressive in your area.
But looking at somebody like you as an example of someone who's, let's say, better educated about LGBT issues, why would we ever want to become like you?
I'd rather be the dumbest son of a bitch alive.
Right, yeah, I'll take being uneducated, right? I'd rather be what did Nyquist call us? Useful idiots? I'd rather be a useful idiot.
He called me a useful idiot, but yeah.
I'd be happy to be called uneducated if it means that my kids aren't going to have their genitals mutilated and they're going to get married and have children just like any normal person. I'll take being uneducated if it means I'm surrounded by a family and friends who love me and aren't trying to like sexually molest me. If I just have normal friends that I do normal things with and I don't have to worry about some kind of weird transactionalism that's involved where they get to sodomize me. Yeah, I
Oh,
I
come
think
on, Ted.
I think I'll take the label. I'll be uneducated. It sounds good to me because my life is actually really nice. And unlike you, I'm not cripplingly lonely. Maybe being uneducated isn't so bad.
I want to defend all of the normal people in California and Massachusetts, or Ted's kind of in the Massachusetts area, you know. They're like 90%, probably closer to 98% of the people. Well, California might be a lot lower than 98%, but let's just round about 90% of the people in both those states, no matter how, what normal people consider progressive, will ever be okay with pederasty. I mean, this is the reason that the pederasty lobby gets a decent amount of money. I mean, there are advocacy groups for these people, and there's a reason they get nowhere ever. And the only people who openly purport to support pederasty are people who are already sucked into the community. 99% of the general population, I don't care if you are a Harvard PhD, you won't support it. It's not a matter of education, it's a matter of being a decent human being.
Look, Farrelei, can I just ask you real quick? You said before that you thought people who are transgender are born that way. Is that your belief?
Yes, it is.
Okay, well, here's maybe a good way for us to close it for now. Although honestly, I would be really interested in having you back on the show to hear how things are going for you. But here's going to be my closing statement. I was born this way, okay? This is who I am. I'm disgusted by sex perverts and especially horrified by people who prey on children. It's not something that I can be educated out of. No amount of education would ever change me. It's bone deep. I was born this way.
Yeah, and I was meaning to say earlier that I feel like me, at least being gay is something that I feel to my core on such a level that I can't imagine if I were raised in any other environment I wouldn't be gay. It just feels like it's in my DNA almost because it's something I feel so naturally.
I can imagine you being raised in an environment in which you were never molested as a child, where you didn't turn out to be a homosexual.
And in my perspective, I see it as something that's not possible because it feels so extreme. Like, I don't know, like I'm so gay to the point that it's all I can. Like my attraction to men is something that totally like consumes a lot of my thoughts and actions and things that I experience in my life, and it also and a lot of it. Like I'm not saying this has anything to do with being gay, but um, I kind of want, like, part of why I felt comfortable sharing all this information about my activity at gay bars is because I felt like um, a lot of people think it's dangerous to go home with someone you don't know, and I thought that it was thrilling for me to pursue dangerous activity, and I wanted to become the ultimate taboo or this extreme, like, repudiation of societal norms. So I wanted to, like, be as eccentric as I, like, possibly could, and I think that being very progressive and being LGBT helps me be to break away from the mold that cishet society has.
Well, let me respond with this. The more quote unquote progressive society has become, the more quote unquote open society has become, the more quote unquote accepting society has become, the more I have come to realize, and the more I think most people have come to realize, is that the vast majority of people are incredibly unremarkable. And that isn't to say that each individual isn't unique to themselves, but the only thing that opening up progressive societies has proven is that people are so incredibly unremarkable that in order to become remarkable and in order to get attention, they have to slap dildos and glitter and spandex on themselves and tromp through the streets, gyrating their rear ends in front of children. To me, that is not a sign of uniqueness. That's a sign of being so incredibly dull that you have to invent a personality in order to be perceived as interesting. And the only other people who perceive you as interesting are, in fact, the people doing the same thing and pretending themselves to be interesting.
Farrelei, you admitted yourself that you feel like people don't care about you. So it fits your like psych profile that you would live this extreme life to try to be different, because different is at least noteworthy. Different is at least worthy of attention.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it from that perspective. I guess it could be related to me feeling like I'm ignored or that I'm unimportant to people, and so it makes me feel like I am becoming something more by being extremely weird, which I already am, naturally.
There's something else I want to point out to you. You said it seems impossible to you that you weren't born this way because you spend a lot of your time fixated on the idea of engaging in homosexual sex. And you also talked about how most people think that like getting picked up by randos at a gay bar is risky behavior. Going home with somebody you don't know is risky behavior, but you do it anyway in pursuit of this lifestyle. Well, you know who else spends all their time fixating on one thing and then engages in risky behavior in order to obtain it? Heroin addicts. A heroin addict will spend all their time thinking about heroin, and they'll engage in ridiculously self-compromising and self-destructive behavior in order to get more heroin. But they weren't born as heroin addicts. They had some kind of introduction. Somehow they were introduced to this unhealthy stimulant. And you admitted yourself that you had an introduction, that you were molested as a child. So there's no reason for me to believe, just because this is a core part of your personality now, that it's something that you were born with.
Yeah, I just meant that it feels so intense to me that it almost feels ingrained, or it does feel ingrained. And it's like, I feel like all of the science that you would see in the media supports the idea that LGBT is, it might be environmental to an extent, but it's by and large biological or something that.
I mean, you have to realize that all the people that put this in the media, I can't say all, but history has proven that the vast majority of these people themselves are perverts and pederasts. And again, they're continuing the cycle. The only way homosexuals reproduce is by abuse, therefore creating more homosexuals. I mean, that's the only way it happens. And homosexuals, just like any other group, have a vested interest in there being more homosexuals. So the media, which is overwhelmingly controlled by homosexuals or people who promote homosexuality, is of course going to feed society what's necessary to create more homosexuals. I mean, just look at Anderson Cooper. Anderson Cooper just had, I was horrified when I saw this. I wanted to cry. He has a son now. I cannot imagine what that child is going to go through. And maybe Anderson Cooper won't abuse his child, but guess what? Anderson Cooper is involved in the media and television, industries that have people like Harvey Weinstein at the heart of them. It is one continuous cycle. All of the science you are promoting and all of the, well, it's just obvious for educated people who pay attention to the mainstream media. The mainstream media is composed of people who want to create more gays. It's very, very simple.
Okay, well, I'd respond first by saying that, this is besides the point, but as for the word homosexual, I don't feel keen on that word. Like, it sounds too clinical, and I just feel like gay or queer kind of moves away from the patho. And also, like what you had said about, gays being recruited, or gays recruiting children, that's something that is very, like, an outdated belief that has even been debunked by, like, far-right conservatives like Ronald Reagan. In California in 1978, they had a proposition to ban gay teachers or ban people or make it acceptable to fire someone for coming out as homosexual to their class. And so even Ronald Reagan, at the time that he was ignoring the AIDS crisis that was killing a lot of gays, he spoke out against it and said that a lot of the evidence is supporting that sexual orientation is something that is something that's genetically determined, a congenital condition, and not something that is influenced by your teachers or adult figures in your life. And Ronald Reagan is about as far right as you get.
And here we are. Look how right he was. I mean, 40 years after the fact, he was proven right because nothing bad has happened. We're just as wholesome and healthy a society as we were in 1978. Clearly, all of the objection that people had to homosexual teachers coming out to their classrooms back then, it was just unfounded alarmism, because it's not like we were on the precipice of a slippery slope with that. Look, we're fine. We're just as healthy 40 years later as we were in the late 70s.
Yeah, I do love that it has made a lot of progress over it since the 70s, especially because the proposition failed.
He was being sarcastic.
Like, I know, but the proposition to ban gay teachers, it failed by a large margin even at that time, and California has moved on to even requiring, at least in public schools, LGBT history and contributions to society be part of the curriculum.
Yes, and a lot of California parents have a problem with it. And the other thing is, the other half of the population of California, most of whom happen to be Hispanic and deeply religious, just educate their children otherwise.
Well, California, even the Hispanic population, like, people were saying that the Prop 8 in California to ban gay marriage in 2008 passed narrowly 52 to 48, and people attributed that to Mormons as well as blacks and Hispanics. But I think that even blacks and Hispanics, they are kind of making progress on the matter, and I think that if California voted on that issue now, it would they would vote in favor of same-sex marriage overwhelmingly. Like, the state of Maryland has a large African American population, and they voted in favor of same-sex marriage legality in 2012. The exit poll suggested that African Americans voted against gay marriage only by like 55 to 45. So it was a big difference from exit polling from California that suggested that over 70% of African Americans voted against gay marriage. So I think that it's all kind of progress that's coming in time for everyone.
Well, look, the Californians can do what they want, but I would never permit a child close contact with a homosexual unsupervised ever. And if you're curious why that is, you should ask your friend Larry Brinken.
Okay, like that's why it's hard to bring this up, and that's why this story is published mostly by conservative media outlets, because people are using Larry to, I don't know, reinforce negative stereotypes, as I was saying, about gays. And
It's
I
not,
mean,
you've reinforced, but I mean, you have to understand that everything you've told us about yourself reinforces all of the stereotype. I can't even call them stereotypes because they're facts. You have categorically stated most of the facts that Ted and I already believe, that most gays are abused as children. Look at that confirmation. That a lot of gay people happen to be abused by family. Look at that confirmation. That a lot of gay people, homosexuals, perverts, whatever you want to call them, happen to continue the cycle. Look, you're involved with people who are continuing the cycle. I mean, you can't really pass judgment upon the intellectual capacity of Ted and I when you yourself have proven everything we believe.
Well, also, we opened this conversation with a discussion, an argument over whether or not LGBT perverts in general, whatever acronym you want to apply, whether or not they were less happy, right? Whether or not they had higher incidences of depression or social maladjustment. And here you are telling us about your life, and it's fucking miserable, dude. Let me ask you this, Farrelei. Do you have any friends who aren't trying to have gay sex with you?
I have to think about that question. I have to say, like, I guess I do have friends that aren't having, like, I have had sex with them, but it's not like conditional that I have sex with them for us to be friends. Like, we did a lot of other things, and the
Okay,
sex
wait.
part was over like after the first night or two.
Just tell me about your closest non-homosexual friend.
No one.
Yeah, that sounds horrible, dude. So for some reason, 98% of the population, just as like some kind of weird sampling anomaly, you've never made friends with any of them?
I have made friends with straight cis people in my life, but I've pretty much don't really have it. I wouldn't consider them friends now because I don't speak to them anymore. I only consider friends people who I keep in touch with, not intermittently, but like on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's basically what most people mean when they talk about friends. That's what I meant. That's weird, dude. That's weird and unhappy. That sounds really sad. I think you
I
should
mean,
try to make some normal friends who you're
even
the basis of your friendship is not that you're like sucking each other off.
I mean, I even look at myself here. I am a traditionalist, monarchist, white nationalist, and I have an Indian friend. I have, well, we don't talk anymore as of a couple months ago, a Jewish friend. Hell, I know a gay guy. So it's amazing to me that someone, I mean, I would feel you probably consider me, I mean, you've already said like an uneducated person. You probably consider me a bigot, but I have a broader, more gross diversity of friends than you do.
Well, you're not even thinking outside the box enough here, James. I'm sure you have friends who are just totally apolitical. You also, I'm sure, just have loads of friends who fall all over the place on the political spectrum. I mean, I know I do. I'm a far right Catholic traditionalist, right? But I have friends who are Jewish. I have friends who are atheists. I have friends who are, have left wing political views. I have friends who have no political views. I have friends who are around my age. I have friends who are a different age from me. I have friends who are the same race as me and friends who aren't, right? I mean, it's it's really weird to me, Farrelei, to hear that every person that you've cultivated a contact with, like social contact with, is somebody who's in this very, very small minority, this really closed circuit of guys who are into banging other guys. To me, that screams that there's something missing. There's a hole in your life.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with like where you go to seek out friendships. Since I had spent most of my time in San Francisco, several months that I've been there, unless when I wasn't like wherever I was living, I was always in the Castro looking for a new guy. So and in the Castro district, it's like at least 99. I want to say virtually everyone there is queer. Um,
Hey, man, are you out of doors right now?
uh,
What's that?
no.
Okay, there's a lot of background. Like it sounds like you're in a like
Wind.
wind tunnel or something. Is there a fan directly on you, or?
All right, I turned it off.
Okay. Yeah, maybe don't point a fan at your microphone. This is inside baseball. This is a little inside baseball secret of broadcasting here. Don't point a fan at the microphone.
Yeah, yeah, I've learned some lessons here about live chats. I can't hear myself really, so it might sound like amplified. Anyway, what was I saying?
Well, look, Farrelei, we need to wrap it up, man. I mean, this has been a long show. There was a whole other segment that we wanted to do after we got done talking to you, but we're gonna save that for a future episode, if you don't mind, James.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because it's gonna be a long time before this gets uploaded. Look, man, I really hope that you will. Let me ask you this, actually. How did you come across the show? How did you find out about our show?
Um, the way I found out is through you. Saw an article, I think it was on Queerty, about the controversy that surrounded your tweet in 2016 when you were running for state senate in
And you're on
Massachusetts.
queer news websites.
Yeah, and then from there I followed you on Twitter, and from there I guess I found some links to Politics of Three through your tweets, and I followed those links, and I listened to a few of the streams. I listened to a lot of political commentary from people on the right, even though I don't agree with it. I don't know why I'm drawn to it, but anyway, and also even conservative Christians. Like I've been listening a lot to when I was in high school, I listened to Westboro, and I know I lost my train of thought.
No, that's all right. I was just trying to figure out how you became a listener of the show. Look, man, keep watching the show. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad that our content is reaching people as varied as and diverse as diverse an audience as this. I'm worried about you. I'm not gonna lie. I'm worried about you. I hope that you'll keep in touch. I'd love to have you back on to talk to you some more. I think you've found yourself in a very unhealthy groove in life. I'm not going to mince words here. We have to wrap this up. I think it's fair to say that neither James nor I are going to be adopting any of your language policing ideas about how to talk about trans people or checking our transphobia. Go ahead, James.
Well, you said policing speech on trans people. I said also pedophiles.
I think it's fair to say that you failed to convince us with your case about transphobic language, but you're welcome to come back on anytime to talk about any other case that you want to make. I think you're somebody with a very interesting and illuminating story to tell. I hope that your life changes. I hope that your life changes for the better. Keep listening to. I don't think Westboro Baptist Church is very healthy. Those guys are lunatics. But keep trying to listen to. It's healthy to try to maybe reality check the way you're living your life by listening to alternative viewpoints. So keep doing that. And like I said, please stay in touch. I'd very much like to know how things turn out for you.
Okay, yeah, we'll do. I'm glad that I agreed to come on. I was apprehensive about it, as I've probably mentioned. So, yeah, this was a meaningful stream for me, and I don't have anything to say beyond that. I guess we are about a point where we can wrap up.
Okay, guys, to all our listeners, this has been the Politics of Three. I want to thank Jeff Nyquist for coming back on the show in spite of our impertinence. I want to thank Farrelei for coming on and being so open about his life. And most of all, I want to thank you for bearing with us here as we had this phenomenal gear shift sort of into a much less light, much heavier, let's just say a much heavier second act on this show. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. This has been the Politics of Three.
I want to say that, whoa, that was something.
Yeah, that I'm really concerned. I'm really concerned both about this guy's potential to harm others and this guy's potential to be harmed. He's a high risk in both directions.
It was so weird. I oscillated between chalk line and wishing he would be institutionalized for his own safety.
I mean, I can understand the chalk line thing. He was saying some really awful things about children. I think that this is somebody who should never be around children unsupervised, for sure. I think this is a guy who, well, anyway, I think that speaks for itself.
You're going to have one hell of a time editing this.
Yes, I am.
There's also part of me, and I couldn't shake it after about 45 minutes into the conversation, I think he really got kind of a kick out of having our attention.
Man, I honestly feel like sick. I feel like
I showered probably 45 minutes before we did this. I am in comfortable clothes, and I just feel like I need to go scrub my body.
Yeah, I'm not saying this for affect. I feel physically unwell. I feel it's like a knot in my stomach, basically. It's like it's not like a stomach ache like when you eat too much food. It's like a pit. I feel a pit in my stomach.
Yeah.
Like the feeling you get when you had a really bad scare.
I was thinking about before we started, like, or kind of when you were arguing with Jeff, I'm like, I'm going to go to the grocery store tomorrow and get this because I want to make this. And now I'm like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, that was harrowing.